The old wood cabin sat alone, surrounded by trees and darkness. The shades were drawn, and a dog lay motionless on the front porch. A thin stream of smoke flowed out of the chimney and headed west, across the rural Maryland countryside toward Washington, D.C. Inside, a man sat silently in front of the fireplace, shoving stacks of paper into the hot flames. The papers were the product of months of tedious and meticulous work. Each sheet represented hour upon hour of surveillance notes, in-depth subject profiles, and maps of neighborhoods throughout the D.C. metropolitan area. He knew when the police patrolled, when the newspapers were delivered, who jogged and at what time, and most importantly, where his targets slept and what time they awoke. He and his men had stalked them for months, watching and waiting, patiently discerning which part of their daily routine could be exploited and when they would be most vulnerable. The men he had been stalking had sent him to kill people who were deemed a threat to the national security of the United States of America. He had lost track of the number of people he had killed in the service of his country. Whatever the number was, he held no regrets for the men he had killed. They were honorless, evil psychopaths, killers of innocent civilians. The solitary figure sitting in front of the fire was an assassin of assassins, an exporter of death, trained and funded by the United States government. His short blonde hair glowed as he stared deeper and deeper into the flames. Tomorrow he would kill for the first time on American soil. The times, places, and targets had all been chosen. In less than 24 hours, the course of American politics would be changed forever. The sun rose over Washington, D.C., marking the start of what would be a long and busy day. With the president's annual budget 24 hours away from a full House vote, the town was in a frenzy. Congressmen, senators, bureaucrats, and lobbyists were making a last-minute push to amend or strike certain elements of the budget. The count was too close to call, and the leaders of both parties were exerting great pressure on their members to vote along partisan lines. No one was exerting more pressure than Stu Garrett, the president's chief of staff. It was nearing 9 a.m., and Garrett was ready to explode. He was standing in the Blue Room of the White House watching the president read Humpty Dumpty to a group of kindergartners, and his anger was increasing by the second. Garrett had told the president that the photo op with the kids was out of the question. But the White House press secretary, Anne Moncour, had sold the president on the idea that in the throes of a cutthroat budget battle, it would be good PR for him to look as if he were above the dirty political horse trading of Washington. Garrett had been working around the clock for the last month trying to get the votes needed to pass the budget. If the budget was defeated, their chances for re-election would be severely hampered. The count would be close, but there was a plan to make a last-minute charge. The only problem was that Garrett needed the president back in his office making phone calls, not sitting in the Blue Room reading nursery rhymes. Garrett glared at Anne Moncour. "This is the dumbest stunt you've ever pulled. If the budget gets torpedoed tomorrow, you're history. I'm going to the Oval Office, and if he isn't in there in 5 minutes, I'm going to come back in here and personally throw your ass out on the street." Moncour strained to smile and look relaxed. She noticed that some of the staffers and several members of the press were watching. She was relieved when Garrett headed for the door. For obvious reasons, Moncour didn't care for the chief of staff. Simply put, he was a pain in the ass to work for. Michael O'Rourke walked purposefully down the hallway of the Cannon House office building. It was just after 9 a.m., and the building was crowded with people. O'Rourke avoided making eye contact with anyone for fear of being stopped. He was not in a good mood. O'Rourke didn't like Washington. In fact, it was safe to say he hated Washington. Midway down the hall, he turned into an office and closed the door behind him. Inside were 5 men wearing dark suits and drinking coffee. O'Rourke shot his secretary a quick glance, but before she could respond, all 5 men closed in on him. "Congressman O'Rourke, could I please have a moment of your time? I just need 5 minutes. "Congressman, I would like to speak to you about how the farmers in your district will be affected if you don't vote for the president's budget." The 32-year-old freshman congressman held up his hands. "Gentlemen, you're wasting your time. I've already made up my mind, and I will not be voting for the president's budget. Now, if you will kindly vacate my office, I have work to do." The group started to protest, but O'Rourke opened the door and waved them into the hallway. All 5 men headed off in search of another congressman to cajole. The portly lobbyist hung back. "Mr. O'Rourke, if you vote no on the president's budget, the American Farmers Association will be left with no other choice than to support your opponent next year." "Nice try, but I'm not running for a second term." The young congressman grabbed the door and closed it in the lobbyist's face. O'Rourke turned to face his secretary, Susan Chambers. "I'm sorry, Michael. I told them you had a full calendar, but they insisted on waiting." "No apologies needed, Susan." Michael walked into his office. "Has Tim come in yet?" "No." "Has he called?" "Yes. He said that since there isn't a snowball's chance in hell of the president taking the funding for the Rural Electrification Administration out of the budget, he's going to get some errands done and be in around 1. Tim O'Rourke was Michael's younger brother by 2 years and his chief of staff. "I'm glad everyone is so positive around here." Susan walked to the doorway of O'Rourke's office. "Michael, we're only being realists. I admire that you're trying to do what's right, but the problem is guys like you don't win in Washington." "Well, thank you for your vote of confidence, Susan." Susan looked into O'Rourke's bloodshot eyes. "Michael, this bachelor life is going to kill you. Why don't you make an honest woman out of that adorable girlfriend of yours?" O'Rourke had been hearing it from everyone lately, but he was in no position to get married. Maybe in another year, after he got out of Washington. "Susan, I'm Irish. We tend to get married late in life. Besides, I'm not so sure she'll have me." "That's a lie, and you know it. She adores you, so don't screw it up. I hope being crowned the most eligible bachelor in Washington hasn't gone to your head." "Very funny, Susan." Chambers turned and walked away, laughing. "I'm glad you're getting such a kick out of this, Susan. Hold all my calls. I have an appointment at noon, and until then, I don't want to be disturbed." O'Rourke shut the door and sat down behind his desk. When the president entered his office, he found Garrett and his budget director, Mark Dixon, poring over the prospective vote count, trying to figure out whom they could sway to their side. "All right, Stu, I'm all yours for the rest of the day. Just tell me what you want me to do." Garrett and Dixon had been in the office since 6 a.m., putting together a final list of possible holdouts. With 1 day to go, they had secured 209 votes. The opposition had 216 votes, and 10 congressmen were still undecided. Garrett had a piece of paper in front of him with 2 headings, undecided and possible defectors. 10 names were under the undecided heading, and 6 under the possible defectors heading. "All right, here's the current situation, Jim." No one but Stu Garrett ever called the president by his first name. "We need to put this thing to bed today. Bassett and Kozlowski are up on the hill playing good cop, bad cop with the fence-sitters. We're going to try and start a stampede by noon." Tom Bassett was the Speaker of the House, and Jack Kozlowski was the chairman of the House Appropriations Committee. "Are we in a position to do that?" "Well, Tom Bassett has a meeting with Congressman Moore at 11, and when that meeting is over, Moore's going to make an announcement that he's backing the budget." "How much is it going to cost us?" "Only about $10 million. "You guys are going to bag Frank Moore for $10 million? That's nothing more than pocket change to Frank. How are you going to get him to settle for so little?" "We recruited some outside help to get him to see things our way." "What kind of help?" "Arthur Higgins arranged to have some photos taken of the congressman and a certain young woman." Arthur Higgins. There was no more mysterious name in all of Washington. Stevens seriously wondered whether it was in his best interest to know any details. Arthur Higgins was a legendary figure in the power circles of Washington and many of the world's other capitals. For 40 years, Higgins had run the most secretive branch of the CIA. Officially, he never existed, nor did his department. Higgins had been the author and controller of the agency's most delicate and dangerous covert operations since the height of the Cold War. Several years earlier, he had been forced out of the CIA in a heated power struggle. What he had been doing with his time and talents since was something that was whispered about behind closed doors. "You are going to blackmail Frank Moore?" "Essentially." "I don't want to know the details, do I?" "No. Just trust me when I say Moore will see no other choice than to vote our way." "Next time I would prefer it if you would let me know about these things before they're set in motion." "Understood. Jim, I need you to get working on a couple of these possible defectors. Our staffers have been feeling these guys out, and I think that 2 of the 6 will give us their vote if you promise not to back their opponent in the next election. Out of the 10 undecideds and the 6 possible defectors, we're going to have to get at least 9 or the budget's dead. And if that happens, we may as well kiss next year's election goodbye." "What about any possible defections from our side?" "Don't worry about that. If one of those little pricks steps out of line, Kozlowski will cut every penny of federal money from his district. We're not going to have any traitors." Besides being chairman of the House Appropriations Committee, Jack Kozlowski was the party's chief neckbreaker on the Hill. He was known and feared by all as one of the roughest players in D.C. What I need from you this morning are some real nice down-home phone calls to a couple of these rookie congressmen, telling them how much their vote would mean to you and the country. Maybe even invite them over here for lunch. If everything goes well with Moore, which I'm sure it will, I want to schedule a press conference at noon to try and spook the rest of these guys into settling. At the press conference, I want you to stand up and complain about congressional gridlock. Tell them that you can't start fixing this nation if they don't pass your budget. You know the routine. The president nodded his head. He was a professional politician, and Garrett was one of the best handlers in the business. He trusted Garrett completely when it came to manipulating public opinion. Garrett circled 3 names under the possible defectors heading. Now, Jim, these 3 boys are freshmen and full of ideals. If you call them up and beat the commander-in-chief drum, I think we can get them to jump sides. The first name on the list was Michael O'Rourke. Michael O'Rourke. Where have I heard that name before? I have no idea. He's a freshman independent from Minnesota. He was on Senator Olson's staff before he was elected. He graduated from the University of Minnesota where he played hockey. After college, he went into the Marine Corps and fought in the Gulf War. He was awarded the Silver Star. I know I've heard that name before. Mark Dixon interjected. Sir, you may have read about him in the papers. He's recently been crowned the most eligible bachelor in Washington. You're right, that is where I've heard about him. Very handsome young man. What else do we know about him? Garrett looked through some notes that an assistant had made. He's 32 years old from Grand Rapids. His family is big in the timber business. They got some serious money. At any rate, he says he won't vote for your budget unless all of the funding for the Rural Electrification Administration is cut. That's the only thing he doesn't like about it? No, he says the whole thing sucks, but he's willing to sign on to it if, and only if, you cut the funding for the REA. That's ridiculous. We'd lose half the votes we already have, and we wouldn't gain more than a handful. Exactly. Well, let's call him and find out just how serious he is when he's got the President of the United States breathing down his neck. Stevens pressed a button on his phone console. Betty, would you please get Congressman O'Rourke on the line for me?
Yes, sir.
O'Rourke was deep in thought when Susan's voice came over the intercom. Yes, Susan, what is it?
Michael, the President is holding on line 1.
Very funny, Susan. I told you I didn't want to be bothered. Please tell the President I'm a little busy at the moment. I'll try to get back to him after lunch.
Michael, I'm not kidding. The President is holding on line 1.
O'Rourke frowned at the blinking light and pressed it. Hello, this is Congressman O'Rourke. The President was sitting behind his desk, and Stu Garrett and Mark Dixon were listening in on the call.
Hello, Congressman O'Rourke. This is the President. How are you this morning?
Just fine, sir, and how are you? O'Rourke closed his eyes and wished Susan would have listened to him.
Well, I would be doing a whole lot better if I could get some of you people over there to back me on this budget.
Yes, I imagine you would, sir.
Well, Michael, the reason I'm calling is to tell you that I really need your vote tomorrow. And before you tell me yes or no, I want to talk to you about a couple of things. I've been doing this for over 25 years now, and I remember when I was a freshman representative. I came here filled with piss and vinegar. I was going to change this place. I was going to make a difference. Well, I quickly realized that if I didn't learn to take the good with the bad, I was never going to get anything done. Michael, there's no way that I will ever be able to send a budget up there that everyone agrees with. Now, I know you want the REA disbanded, and to be honest, I've wanted to kill the damn program for the past 20 years. But we're in a goddamned war here, Michael. If this budget doesn't get passed, I will be hampered in my ability to put this country back on its feet. And I'm asking you for a big favor. Help me pass this budget. If you come on board, Michael, I can guarantee that you'll go a long way in politics.
Stevens paused to give O'Rourke some time to think of the ways the President of the United States could help his career.
What do you say, Michael? Can I count on your vote tomorrow?
There was an awkward silence as O'Rourke cursed himself for taking the call. He did not want to get into a debate with the President right now. So, true to his typical form, he cut straight to the heart of the matter. Mr. President, there is very little that I like about your budget. My vote will be no tomorrow, and there's nothing that will change that. I'm sorry to have wasted your time by accepting this call. Without waiting for a response, O'Rourke hung up. The President sat in disbelief, staring at the phone. He looked over at Garrett.
Did he just hang up on me?
Guy must be an idiot. He's definitely not going to be around this town for long. Don't let it bother you. I'll have Kozlowski take care of him. Congressman O'Rourke was sitting at his desk, reading over some documents and dictating notes when the door to his office burst open. A slender, well-dressed man who looked vaguely familiar pushed his way past Susan and approached Michael's desk.
Congressman O'Rourke, my name is Anthony Vanelli. I apologize for the intrusion. I'm one of Chairman Kozlowski's aides. He has a proposal he would like you to consider, and he needs an answer immediately.
O'Rourke placed his dictaphone on the desk behind several stacks of files. O'Rourke had heard stories about the aide and doubted this would be a friendly visit.
Congressman O'Rourke, I've been sent here to find out if you're still going to vote against the president's budget. And if you are, what we can do to change your mind.
Well, Mr. Vanelli, I've made my position very clear. I will vote no on the budget unless the president cuts all funding for the Rural Electrification Administration.
Congressman, we live in the real world. And in the real world, the Rural Electrification Administration is going to continue to exist. It's just the way things operate around here. You have to try to get over the little things and concentrate on the big picture. You can't damn the whole budget just because you don't like one little part of it.
Mr. Vanelli, I would hardly consider $500 million little. The thing you people don't understand is that I consider most of the president's budget to be a waste. I am merely focusing on the Rural Electrification Administration because it's an easy target. O'Rourke looked down to make sure the dictaphone was still running.
Enough of this bullshit, Mike. You either get on board with the president's budget or your career is over.
Mr. Vanelli, what exactly do you mean my career will be over?
You either play ball with us or Chairman Kozlowski will make sure he cuts off every penny from getting to your district. We've got people right now who are digging through your past. If we find anything dirty, we'll spread it all over town. And if we don't, we'll make something up. We could ruin you in a week. I want you to sit in here and think about having your career ruined over one stupid vote. And when you're done, I want an answer.
Vanelli turned for the door. O'Rourke grabbed the dictaphone. He pressed the rewind button. The machine started to squeak as the tape spun in reverse. Vanelli heard the familiar sound and turned to look. Michael pressed play.
We've got people right now who are digging through your past. If we find anything dirty, we'll spread it all over town. And if we don't, we'll make something up.
Vanelli lunged for the dictaphone. O'Rourke grabbed Vanelli's outstretched hand. O'Rourke had practiced the judo move thousands of times while he was in the Marines. In one quick motion, he twisted Vanelli's hand. Vanelli collapsed to his knees in pain.
Let go of my wrist and give me that goddamn tape.
Listen to me, Vanelli. You're an aide to a congressman, not a hitman for the mafia. I don't know who you think you are coming in here and threatening me, but if you or your scumbag boss ever bother me again, you'll have the FBI, 60 Minutes, and every other major news organization in the country crawling up your ass. You understand? Vanelli shook his head yes and started to whimper. Garrett came bursting into the Oval Office.
I got great news. Moore is on board.
The president punched his fist into the air and let out a yell.
Jim, I think we should postpone the press conference until 1 p.m.
Stu, you know I hate postponing those things. It's just going to make us look like we're unorganized.
We were at 209 votes versus 216 this morning. Since then, we've picked up Moore, Reiling, and one of those Hicks. They were all undecided, but we got Dreyer and Hampton to defect. That's -2 for them and +5 for us. That puts us at 214 apiece.
I see where you're headed with this, Stu. You'd like to turn this into a little victory announcement.
Exactly.
Stu, do what you have to do to move it, but try to be gentle with Miss Moncour. Garrett headed off to get the job done. He would be about as gentle with Anne Moncour as a 5-year-old boy is with his 3-year-old brother. He was in one of his zones. Victory was just around the corner, and he would do anything to win. He had no time for frail egos and overly sensitive, politically correct appointees. They were nothing more than support people. It was amazing to him that the people who complained the most were usually the ones who were trying to justify their jobs. The people in the trenches never complained. They just continued to produce results. Their new ally, Arthur Higgins, was a producer. No bullshit, no complaining, only results. He made a mental note to thank Mike Nance, the National Security Advisor, for setting that one up. God, did he do a nice job on Frank Moore. That could be the one that put them over the top. The president and his entourage were standing in the anteroom behind the White House press room. They could hear Anne Moncour explaining to the White House press corps that the president had a busy afternoon and would not be able to answer a lot of questions. Garrett was reminding the president which reporters he should steer clear of. Anne Moncour glanced over and saw the president standing in the doorway.
Good afternoon, Mr. President. Are you ready to take over?
The president walked toward the podium, his slight smile turning into a big one. Like most politicians, Stevens knew how to work the crowd, and his most successful tool of all was his larger-than-life smile. What most of the people in the room didn't know was that the smile had been rehearsed. Few things in this administration happened by accident. Stu Garrett made sure of that. I've called this press conference to announce a victory for the American people. During the past week, this administration has battled partisan politics, disinformation, gridlock, and a 32-vote deficit to secure the successful passage of my budget in the House of Representatives. As of noon today, we have obtained 220 votes, enough for a narrow margin of victory. I'm sorry for being so brief, but I have an extremely busy calendar and I'm already running an hour behind. I have a couple of minutes to field a few brief questions. Hands immediately shot up, and a dozen or so reporters started to shout questions. The president looked for the familiar face of the ABC White House correspondent. Stevens pointed in his direction. As of this morning, sir, it was reported that you had secured approximately 210 votes. How did you pick up the remaining 10 so quickly? Well, we picked up the 10 so quickly because there are a lot of people up on the Hill who know, despite what the opposition has been saying, that this is a good budget. The president turned his head away and rested his gaze and forefinger on another friendly face, the White House correspondent for the Associated Press. Mr. President, are you worried that with such a narrow victory in the House, your budget will have a harder time getting through the Senate, where the opposition holds a higher percentage of seats? Well, not really. The American people want this budget, and our senators know that. They will do what is right, and they will pass the budget. Stevens started to turn to find another reporter before he finished answering the question. This time, the president turned to a stunning brunette sitting in the section usually reserved for foreign press. He decided that since voters cared little about foreign affairs, he would be safe calling on her. The young lady in the back row. The president was expecting to hear a foreign accent, and was somewhat shocked when she stood and spoke perfect English. Mr. President, Liz Scarlatti from the Washington Reader. Congressman Michael O'Rourke from Minnesota has said that even though he thinks your budget is, quote, stuffed with more pork than a Jimmy Dean sausage, he would still be willing to vote for it if you shut down the REA. My question is this, Mr. President, I know that the leaders of our country are very busy, but have you or anyone else in Washington noticed that all of rural America has had electricity for over 20 years? And now that you've been informed, what are you going to do to shut down this wasteful program? Well, Miss Scarlatti, first of all, this budget is one of the leanest budgets that any president in the last 20 years has sent to the Hill. Eyes started to roll. The cynical members of the press were getting sick of hearing the factless rhetoric of the president. Stu Garrett could see that the president was in trouble, so he stepped forward and touched his elbow. The president turned, and Garrett pointed to his watch. People, I'm running very late. Let me finish answering the young lady's question, and then I'm going to have to leave. Getting rid of government waste has been a major priority of my administration and will continue to be one. Thank you all very much for your time and have a good day. 10:40 p.m. Thursday. The blue van wound its way through the Washington, D.C. neighborhood of Friendship Heights. Dark green letters across the side of the van read, Johnson Brothers Plumbing, 24-hour emergency service available. Inside were two men, both in their late 20s, both extremely fit. They were wearing coveralls and baseball hats. The van slowed down and turned into a narrow, poorly lit alley. 10 yards into the alley, the van rolled to a stop, and the driver pulled into reverse. Pulling back out into the street, the van headed back in the direction from which it had just come. To anyone who may have been watching, it looked as if the plumber's van was searching for a house in need of its services. Back in the alley, behind a row of garbage cans, the dark-haired former passenger of the van crouched. After several minutes, he started down the alley. 6 houses down, he stopped behind a garage. It belonged to Mr. Harold J. Burmeister, retired banker. He grabbed a plastic bag from inside his pocket, reached over the 7-foot fence, and dumped the bag's contents into the backyard. Huddling between the corner of the fence and the garage, he pressed the light on his digital watch. It was 10:44 p.m. He would have to wait another 15 minutes to make sure the bait was taken. Burmeister felt that high-tech security systems were a waste of money. His was the only house on the block that did not have one, and the only house on the block that had never been burglarized. This distinction was directly attributable to a German shepherd named Fritz. The unwelcomed observer waited in the shadows, as he had done on previous nights. At 10:55, the backyard floodlight was turned on. A moment later, the door opened, and Fritz bounded down the steps and across the yard. Every night at exactly 10:55, Burmeister would let Fritz out to go to the bathroom, then let him back in 5 minutes later, just in time for his owner to watch the nightly news. The dog ran straight to the back fence. Fritz was urinating on the fence when he started to sniff. Dropping his leg, he ran toward the corner where the meat had been deposited and started to snap up the small pieces of beef. After several minutes, the creaking noise of the back door opening broke the silence, and without being called, Fritz ran into the house. 12:05 a.m., Friday. Senator Daniel Fitzgerald's limousine lumbered north along Massachusetts Avenue. It was just after midnight, and the senator was sitting in the back seat, drinking a glass of scotch and reading the Post. Fitzgerald was the chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, and one of the most powerful men in Washington. He had a full head of gray hair and a red bulbous nose that was a direct result of his heavy drinking. The senator had two vices, women and alcohol. He had already been married 3 times and was currently separated from his third wife. He'd been through approximately a half-dozen treatment programs, none of which had worked. Several years earlier, he decided to stop fighting his addiction. He loved the booze, and that was that. Fitzgerald had been in Washington for over 40 years. He had been a politician his entire adult life, and he'd grown numb to the day-to-day dealings of the nation's capital. The 40-plus years of lying, deceit, deal-cutting, career-trashing, and partisan politics had become so ingrained in Fitzgerald that he not only thought his behavior was acceptable, he truly believed it was the only way to do business. The limousine turned off Massachusetts Avenue and wound through the narrow residential streets of Colorama Heights. 1 block before its destination, the limousine passed a plain white van. Inside were 2 men who had been waiting and preparing for this night for over a year. The limo stopped in front of Fitzgerald's $1.2 million brownstone, and the driver jumped out to open the door for his boss. By the time he got around to the rear of the car, Fitzgerald was out of the back seat and stumbling toward the house. The driver watched Fitzgerald punch in his security code and unlock the door. When the senator stumbled into the foyer, the driver got into the limo and drove away. Fitzgerald set his keys down on a table and reached for the light switch. He flipped it up, but nothing happened. Swearing to himself, he looked around the dark house. From where Fitzgerald stood, he could barely make out the white tile floor of the kitchen just 30 feet away, straight down the hallway. As he started for the kitchen, his heavy, expensive wingtips echoed throughout the house. When he reached the kitchen, he searched for the light switch. Before Fitzgerald could find it, a pair of gloved hands came out of the darkness and grabbed him from behind. The blonde-haired intruder yanked the older man off his feet and slammed him face first into the tiled floor. Dropping down on his target, the powerful man thrust his knee into the center of Fitzgerald's upper back and grabbed the senator's head with both hands. In one quick burst of strength, the assassin brought all of his weight down on the back of Fitzgerald's head and yanked up his chin. The noise that the senator's neck made as it snapped shot through the house. The crack was followed by a silence, and then an eerie gurgling noise that emanated from Fitzgerald's throat. The dying senator's eyes opened wider and wider. About 30 seconds later, the gurgling subsided, and Fitzgerald's body lay lifeless on the cold tile floor. The assassin rose to his feet. He looked down at the dead body with a sense of great satisfaction. The killer standing over Fitzgerald had just avenged the deaths of 8 of his closest friends. 8 men who had died a senseless death in a desolate desert thousands of miles away. All because men like Fitzgerald didn't know how to keep their mouths shut. The killing of Fitzgerald was personal, but the next 2 would be business. "3:45 a.m. Friday. The blue Johnson Brothers plumbing van was again driving through the streets of Friendship Heights. It pulled into the same alley it had stopped in 5 hours earlier. While the van was still moving, the passenger jumped down onto the pavement and darted into the shadows. He waited while the van drove away. Slung over his shoulder was a large canvas bag. After several minutes, he started down the alley. When he reached Burmeister's fence, he carefully lifted the latch on the gate. Slipping into the backyard, he dropped down behind a row of bushes and looked up at the windows of Burmeister's house and the neighbors. He sat behind the bush, waiting and watching. There was time to be careful, and that was the way he liked it, the way he'd been trained. The man reached into the bag, retrieving a pair of wire cutters. Rising to his feet, he walked to the back stoop. He used the wire cutters and cut the phone line running into the basement of the house. He put the wire cutters back in the bag and grabbed a glass cutter. He opened the screen door and slid in between it and the back door. The back door was wood, with the top third split into 4 sections of glass. He placed the cup of the glass cutter in the middle of the bottom left pane and swung the cutting edge around the suction cup. After 5 revolutions, the freshly cut piece of glass popped free and stayed attached to the suction cup. Sticking his arm through the hole, he unlocked the door and stepped into the kitchen, closing the door behind him. He heard the dog breathing and turned to see him lying in front of the kitchen table, relaxed and limp. The man removed the bag from his shoulder. He retrieved a gas mask and a green tank with a clear rubber hose attached to the end. With the tank and mask in hand, he walked to the staircase that led to the master bedroom. He stuck the rubber tube under the door, put his gas mask on, and opened the valve on the tank. Sitting with his back against the wall, he started the timer on his watch. After 15 minutes, he turned off the valve and pulled the tube out from under the door. He opened the door. The intruder walked over to the bed. He nudged Burmeister several times. The old man didn't move. He took the glove off his right hand, placed it on Burmeister's neck, and checked his pulse. He concluded with relief that the old man was fine. The intruder did not know the man he was standing over, and he did not wish to see him die. Harold Burmeister was not the man he was after tonight. He walked around the bed to the double window that looked out onto the street and stared at the house opposite Burmeister's. 5 miles away on the other side of the Potomac River, the second team had moved into position. The nondescript white van was parked on a quiet side street. Inside, the blonde-haired assassin was undergoing a change. He'd taken off his jeans, jacket, and boots, and had replaced them with a pair of sweatpants, a sweatshirt, and a pair of running shoes. 5:55 a.m. Friday. The screen covering Mr. Burmeister's bedroom window had been taken off, and the owner of the house had been carefully moved from the master bedroom down the hall to one of the guest rooms. The intruder was sitting on a wooden chair, staring out the window at a pair of French doors located on the second floor of the house across the street. Resting on his lap was a Remington M24 military sniper rifle, with a customized silencer attached to the end of the barrel. The sky was just starting to brighten. His target would be rising any minute. A light was turned on across the street, and the drapes on the other side of the French doors turned from gray to yellow. In one fast motion, he brought the rifle into a firing position. His finger flipped off the safety while he centered the crosshairs on the middle of the French doors. A blurred shadow moved from behind the curtains. The doors opened. As they swung inward, they revealed the pudgy body of Congressman Jack Kozlowski. He turned and started for the bathroom. The center of the crosshairs rested just below the bald spot on the back of Kozlowski's head. The left forefinger started its slow, even squeeze on the trigger. A second later it caught, and the hammer slammed forward. The hollow point round sliced its way into the still morning air. The bullet slammed into the back of the congressman's head. The next shot struck Kozlowski at the base of his skull and severed all neural communication between the brain and the rest of his body. 6:15 a.m. Friday. Across the Potomac River in McLean, Virginia, the other group sat and waited for their next target. They were parked across the street from Pimmet Bend Park. The driver listened to the police scanner. Another man was in the back looking out the rear windows at the park. From where they were positioned, he could see the assassin leaning against a tree next to the jogging path. He was stretching his legs as he waited, trying to make himself look like just another runner. The assassin looked at his watch. Their next target was due any minute. The target was Senator Robert Downs, the chairman of the Senate Banking Committee and the reigning Prince of Pork. He lived less than 3 blocks away and walked his collie every morning between 6 and 6:20 a.m. It was almost a quarter after, and he was due any minute. The assassin looked up from the tree and saw the familiar brown driving cap of Downs bobbing up and down on the other side of the slight rise in the path. He was 50 yards away, walking at his usual leisurely pace. When Downs reached the crest of the small hill, the assassin noticed a woman about 30 yards behind the senator. She was walking at a fast pace. The assassin noticed she was wearing a Walkman, and he breathed a sigh of relief. No innocent people were to die. When Downs was about 20 yards away, the assassin turned his back to his target and started to stretch again. He could hear the dog panting and the nails of his paws as they struck the asphalt path. By the time the two walkers reached the tree, the woman had passed Downs and was steadily increasing the distance between herself and the senator. The assassin stepped out onto the path and fell into line behind Downs. After about 3 strides, his hand slid underneath his baggy sweats and grabbed the handle of the 9mm Beretta. He closed in on the senator and placed the tip of the silencer inches from the back of his target's head. 2 quick rounds were fired into the base of the skull, and Downs stumbled forward, landing face first on the pavement. The assassin turned and sprinted across the park to the waiting van. The female walker continued her trek without missing a stride as the old collie stood over her dying master and sniffed at the pool of blood that was forming next to his head. The sun had risen in the fall morning sky and was fighting to stay out as the wind picked up and the clouds rolled in. A steady stream of gold and red leaves rustled past the shoes of FBI Special Agent Skip McMahon. McMahon was the special agent in charge of the FBI's East Coast Quick Response Team. The Quick Response Team, or QRT as it was referred to within the Bureau, was composed of an elite group of agents. Their mission was straightforward: to arrive at the crime scene of a terrorist attack and start the immediate collection of evidence and pursuit of the perpetrators, while the trail was still warm. The unit had planes, helicopters, and mobile crime labs on 24-hour standby, and could be at a crime scene anywhere from Chicago to Miami to New York within hours. McMahon rested his large body against a police car and watched as a body bag containing Senator Fitzgerald was loaded into the back of an FBI van. This was the 3rd crime scene he'd been to this morning. It was a foregone conclusion that the murders were linked. They wouldn't tell the press that, but it didn't take a genius to figure out they had to be connected. The veteran agent looked down the street and shook his head at the crowd of media and curious onlookers who were gathered on the other side of the police barricades. He closed his eyes and tried to imagine exactly how Fitzgerald had been murdered. After a while, he started to look for similarities in the way Kozlowski, Downs, and Fitzgerald had been killed. His concentration was broken by a familiar voice calling his name. McMahon looked up and saw his boss, Brian Roach, walking toward him, with his always-present bodyguards. Roach had been with the Bureau for 26 years and had served as its director for the last 4. He had been a good agent in his day, but that was all history now. Running the FBI meant forgetting almost everything he'd learned about law enforcement and concentrating on politics and administration. Roach grabbed McMahon by the arm, walking him toward the sidewalk. Roach's bodyguards fanned out in a circle. "It's all set. You're in charge of the investigation. There are going to be some people who aren't going to be too happy about that, but I don't care. Fact is, you're the best investigative agent we've got, and I need someone I can trust running this thing. Skip, the pressure to solve this mess is going to be incredible. It's going to come from every direction, and most of it is going to be political. I'll do my best to screen you from it, but I'm not going to be able to block it all." "Nothing we're not used to, right?" "Yeah, but this is going to be different. I need you to come to the White House with me and give a quick briefing. It's driving the president nuts that the only information he's getting is from the TV." Roach nodded toward his limo, and they walked away with bodyguards in tow. As they drove, McMahon filled Roach in on the specifics of Fitzgerald's death. The director had already been briefed by phone on the murders of Kozlowski and Downs. The drive from Georgetown to the White House took less than 10 minutes. "Before we go in, let me warn you about a couple of things. Everyone will understand that you haven't had a lot of time to prepare for this briefing, so keep it simple and try not to editorialize too much. The president won't say a lot, but watch out for Garrett. Don't worry, I won't embarrass you, at least not intentionally. One other thing, don't stick your neck out too far. If they ask you for an opinion, and they will, just tell them it's too early to tell. Brian, I have done this before." "I know, Skip, but you haven't dealt with this administration before. Just trust me, and watch what you say." The director stepped out of the car first. A Secret Service agent escorted them to the cabinet room. As McMahon and Director Roach were getting ready to settle into their chairs, the President, Garrett, and National Security Advisor Mike Nance entered the room. The President took his seat in the middle of the table. Garrett sat to his right and Nance to his left. Sitting across from the president were Skip McMahon, FBI Director Roach, CIA Director Thomas Stansfield, and the CIA's top terrorism expert, Dr. Irene Kennedy. Roach and Stansfield introduced their subordinates, and then Garrett started the meeting.
Well, Director Roach, I sure hope you have some answers for us.
Roach looked to the president. Mr. President, with the help of the Congressional Switchboard and several local police departments, we've secured the whereabouts of the remaining 532 senators and congressmen. All of the Supreme Court justices, cabinet members, and joint chiefs of staff have also been accounted for. Right now, it looks like the only individuals they were after were Senator Fitzgerald, Senator Downs, and Congressman Kozlowski. I have a meeting scheduled for 1 p.m. with Director Tracy of the Secret Service to discuss the resources we have available to provide protection for the remaining members of the House and Senate. I've already dispatched agents to protect the most senior members of both parties. Until we know more about what's going on, I think we should play it safe. I'm going to have Special Agent McMahon take over from here. Special Agent McMahon has been to all 3 crime scenes.
Let me start by saying that this investigation is only a few hours old, so we don't have a lot of specifics.
Mr. McMahon, I fully understand that we are still in the early stages of this investigation, but does anyone have any idea why these 3 men were killed and by whom?
As usual, Garrett was the first, and in this situation, the least qualified to respond.
Until we know more, I think it's a pretty safe bet that it's a terrorist group. One that's probably not so happy about the peace that's spreading in the Middle East, or one of those wacky militia groups from out west.
Mr. McMahon, I know we don't have all the facts, but please, speak your mind.
Well, sir, we have 3 important politicians murdered at 3 different locations within a 5-hour period. Whoever pulled off this operation had to have been planning it for a long time. They took the time to study their targets and carefully picked out when and how to kill each one. They were probably well-financed and had access to some very talented killers. Those killers could be terrorists, ex-military commandos, or hired assassins. Given the information we now have, your guess is as good as mine.
Gentlemen, the President needs to address the nation and to try to explain what's going on. Now is not the time to be shy with your opinions. Director Stansfield, what is your take on what happened?
I would caution against drawing any conclusions until Special Agent McMahon and his people have had time to investigate.
Stansfield's response was followed by an uncomfortable silence. Both Roach and Stansfield had started at the bottom of their respective agencies, and over the years they'd seen presidents come and go, and with them their political appointees, who ran the CIA and the FBI. Some of these directors were more loyal to the man who had appointed them than to the agency they were supposed to be running. Not Roach and Stansfield. To them, the FBI and CIA came first. Political expediency and posturing were things they liked to avoid at all costs. The president sat back in his chair and quietly cursed himself for not replacing Roach and Stansfield when he had taken over the White House. Garrett had wanted both of them replaced, and Stevens was sure he would be reminded of this as soon as the meeting was over. Stevens looked at Kennedy, the CIA's terrorism expert.
Dr. Kennedy, what is your opinion?
Kennedy had the highest IQ in the room by a significant margin. The 38-year-old mother of one had a PhD in Arabic studies and a master's degree in military history. I would have to concur with Special Agent McMahon. The men who conducted this operation are either terrorists, hired assassins, or military commandos. My assumption is that it was the latter of the 3.
What makes you so sure about that?
I think they were military commandos because Mr. Burmeister is still alive.
Mr. Who?
Mr. Burmeister, the man who lives across the street from Congressman Kozlowski. If the people who ran this operation were terrorists, Mr. Burmeister would be dead. Terrorists do not go to the effort to anesthetize people who are in their way. They kill them. If terrorists did this, Mr. Burmeister would be dead as well as the woman who was walking in the park. These murders were committed by military-trained commandos.
You seem awfully sure of yourself, Dr. Kennedy. Are you ruling out the possibility that these murders were committed by a terrorist group?
I do not think they were committed by a fundamentalist terrorist group. A group that, as you said earlier, would be unhappy with the peace that is being made in the Middle East. As far as the murders being committed by a group of domestic terrorists, such as one of your anti-government Aryan Nation types, I highly doubt that they would have the trained personnel it would take to pull something like this off. Besides, why would they kill someone like Senator Downs? He's pro-NRA and pro-military. He's one of the few politicians those militia members like.
Well, I'm glad to know that after hearing a 10-minute briefing, you've solved the case for us. How can you say that so emphatically with such little information?
It is my job to know how these groups kill, Mr. Garrett.
If a group such as Abu Nidal had committed these murders, they would have simply gone down to one of the more popular dining spots in town, planted a bomb, and exploded it during lunch. They would have easily killed a dozen senators and congressmen, and probably a few cabinet members. If you're so sure that it wasn't terrorists, then who did it?
McMahon leaned forward in his chair. Mr. Garrett, we're all professionals here. There is no reason to raise our voices. Dr. Kennedy is not trying to tell us exactly who did it. She's merely helping us narrow our search. Mike Nance could not believe what he was witnessing. He had seen Stu Garrett act like this in countless meetings during the last 3 years. It was a rarity to see anyone put him in his place, let alone an underling from the FBI. The president ended the confrontation. Everybody calm down. We're all under a lot of pressure, and I'm sure it's only going to get worse. Let's relax and discuss Dr. Kennedy's theory. While the meeting continued, Bridget Ryan sat in her cubicle across town at NBC's Washington bureau and tried to look busy. Bridget was a journalism major and was in the middle of a 1-year internship with NBC. Her boss was Mark Stein, the network's D.C. bureau chief. Bridget was outside of Stein's office when the mailman came by and dropped a bundle of letters on her desk. One of her daily tasks was to open and sort her boss's mail. She pulled the rubber band off the stack and grabbed a manila envelope from the bottom. It was addressed to Stein, but contained no return address. She sliced through the top of the envelope and pulled out sheets of paper. After reading the first paragraph, her heart began to race. She took a deep breath and read on. After finishing, she jumped up and threw open the door to Stein's office. Ryan yelled his name and held the sheets of paper up in the air. Stein, who was on the phone, waved her away. He was talking to his boss in New York. Bridget walked around his desk and waved the envelope in his face. Bridget, I'm busy, not now. Mark, this is really important. We just got this in the mail. It's addressed to you, and I think it's from the terrorists. Stein grabbed the sheets of paper and started reading. McMahon and Kennedy were discussing the latter's theory when the door to the cabinet room opened and Jack Warch entered. He was the special agent in charge of the President's Secret Service detail. Excuse me, gentlemen. NBC is announcing that they have a letter from a group claiming responsibility for the murders. Warch opened a cabinet containing a bank of 6 television sets. He turned on the 4 to the left, which were pre-tuned to the major networks and CNN. The familiar face of George Blake, the NBC news anchor, appeared on the screen.
I would like to caution you one more time. We have no proof that they are actually the group that committed the murders. The letter was received by mail at our Washington, D.C. studio just moments ago. It states the following. In 1776, the founders of the United States of America sent a Declaration of Independence to the King of England. In that declaration, Thomas Jefferson wrote that whenever any form of government becomes destructive, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government. We are invoking this right to rise up and alter the course of our government. You have had your chance to correct America's course, and you have failed. Senator Fitzgerald, Congressman Kozlowski, and Senator Downs were killed as a warning to the President and the remaining members of the House and Senate. Your days of deficit spending and partisan politics are over. You have had the time and the opportunity to bring spending under control, and you have done nothing. The time to act is now. We are directing the President to withdraw his budget and construct a balanced budget. This budget will contain no new or raised taxes and will cut all unneeded federal programs. After this budget is passed, the President will submit a national crime bill that will focus on keeping violent criminals off the streets and in jail. The President, the House, and the Senate shall also implement a 2% national sales tax to be used solely for the reduction of the national debt. We will be watching your actions closely. This is the only warning we will give. If you do not respond to these demands, you will be killed. None of you are out of our reach, not even the President.
Congressman O'Rourke, his brother Tim, Susan, and several staffers were sitting in his office watching TV. After Blake read the letter for the 4th time, Tim O'Rourke looked at his brother. Michael, what do you think about all of this? I don't think our country will miss the likes of Fitzgerald, Downs, and Kozlowski. That may well be true, but please don't say that in public. They were senators and congressmen, and no matter what you think of their politics, you can't go around saying they deserve to die. I didn't say they deserve to die. I only said they won't be missed. I'm not comfortable with assassins running around our capital.
but if it takes killing a couple of corrupt dinosaurs like Kozlowski, Fitzgerald, and Downs to bring about some change, I'm all for it." Tim O'Rourke frowned at his older brother. The source of Michael's dislike for the political hierarchy of Washington was deeply rooted. 10 years earlier, when Michael was a senior at the University of Minnesota, his life could not have been better. Michael was about to learn, not for the first time, just how quickly life could change. He was captain of the hockey team, he had a great group of friends, and he was on schedule to complete his history major. There wasn't a gray cloud in Michael O'Rourke's life. On a cold winter night, after one of his hockey games, his parents loaded 2 of Michael's 3 brothers and his little sister into the family's Suburban and started their 2-hour drive back to the O'Rourke's hometown of Grand Rapids in northern Minnesota. About 40 minutes from Grand Rapids, the Suburban was hit head-on by a drunk driver. Michael's sister Katie and his brothers Tommy and little Seamus survived the accident, but his parents didn't. The loving parents of 5 children were dead, killed by a 34-year-old man with 6 previous drunk driving convictions. The death of his parents shattered O'Rourke's life. After graduating in the spring, he joined the Marine Corps as his father and grandfather had done before him. After returning from the Gulf, he blew his knee out on a nighttime training jump, and his career as a United States Marine was effectively ended. O'Rourke left the service and joined Senator Olson's staff in Washington. Senator Eric Olson was a close friend of Michael's deceased parents. Michael looked at Washington through idealistic eyes and saw the new job as an opportunity to do something that would make a difference. Over the next 5 years, Michael became one of the senator's most effective aides. He worked hard and fought not to fall into the trap of Washington apathy. But as time progressed, the behind-the-back dealings of the nation's power brokers wore him down. Right about the time Michael was ready to quit and head back to Minnesota, the congressional seat in his home district opened. Senator Olson encouraged him to run, telling him if the system really bothered him so much, he should try to do something about it. Michael took on the challenge, and with the backing of his grandfather and Senator Olson, the young O'Rourke won the seat easily. That winter, before Michael had taken office, tragedy struck again. The death of another person close to him had forced O'Rourke to look at Washington in a different light, and any joy he felt over his recent victory vanished. His 2-year term as a freshman congressman became a 2-year sentence in a town he despised more and more every day. The phone started to ring, and Susan got up to get it. A moment later, she poked her head back into the room. "Michael, your grandfather's on line 1. "Hello, Seamus." Seamus O'Rourke was the president and sole owner of the O'Rourke Timber Company. Seamus's father had started the company as a small lumber yard in 1918. When Seamus returned from fighting in World War II, he took over the company and turned the sawmill into one of the largest timber companies in the Midwest. Seamus was calling from the deck of the O'Rourke's home in Grand Rapids. Grandpa O'Rourke didn't look a day over 60. He walked 3 miles every morning, but the early morning walks weren't the only thing that kept him looking young. 10 years earlier, the unfortunate death of his son and daughter-in-law had turned him, a 72-year-old grandfather, into the de facto father of a 12-year-old girl, 2 16-year-old twin boys, and Michael and Tim, who were in college at the time.
"Michael, what do you think of the assassinations?"
"I'm torn. Part of me thinks it's exactly what we need, and part of me is very uneasy about it."
"I think that's understandable. What did you think of the men that were killed?"
I don't think the founders of democracy would be sad to see them relinquish their seats of power.
That's for certain.
Seamus, there is something I need to talk to you about. Are you still planning on coming to town this weekend?
Yes, why? What's wrong?
I'm not sure. It might have something to do with what happened last night. I think it'd be best if we talked about it in person. Seamus got the point. In Washington, it was best to assume that anything said over the phone was potentially being recorded by God only knew whom.
Can you give me a hint as to what it's about?
It involves a mutual friend of ours.
I see. Keep it under your hat till I get into town. I'll see you in a couple of days.
Are you flying your plane?
Yes.
Call me and let me know when you'll be landing.
I will. Say hello to Tim and Liz for me.
Will do. Michael hung up the phone and thought about the individual he and Seamus had just alluded to. He definitely has the motive, Michael thought. The motive and the ability. Stu Garrett, Mike Nance, and the White House Communications Director Ted Hopkinson entered the Oval Office.
Gentlemen, what have you decided?
Well, we're going to have you address the nation at 8 this evening. That way we'll get maximum exposure. And it'll give us some time to figure out what in the hell is going on. Right now, my gut reaction is that we come out hard and denounce these assassinations as a direct threat to the national security of the United States of America, and label whoever sent the letter as terrorists. We have to grab a hold of this thing and squash any public support there may be for this list of demands. The nutbags on talk radio are calling in and saying it's about time someone got serious about running this country and got rid of scumbags like Fitzgerald. I think we got to nail this thing down while we still can, and your speech to the nation will be our first chance. Now, Mike and Ted differ with me a little.
What did you have in mind, Mike?
Well, sir, at this point we don't know if the letter is real. The people behind it may want it to look like a simple revolution, but in reality they may have different motives. What if someone didn't want you re-elected, or someone wanted to be president, and the first thing they had to do was scuttle your chances for re-election? Mr. President, all I'm asking is that we wait until the FBI provides us with some reliable information. Then we can formulate a coherent form of action. Besides, thinking we can quash this thing right now is like thinking we can turn back a tidal wave. The public's mistrust of politicians is at an all-time high. The demands listed in the letter are what the voters have been screaming for. If we're going to come out winners on this, we're going to have to be a little more crafty. Hopkinson was shaking his head in agreement. The sun was dropping over the western horizon, and dropping with it was the temperature. O'Rourke walked down the street with his hands in his pockets. He was wearing a pair of jeans and a leather jacket. His left hand was wrapped around the handle of a .45 caliber combat master. As a congressman, O'Rourke had obtained a special permit to carry the weapon. He wasn't carrying the gun just because of the recent assassinations. He had started carrying it several years ago to protect himself against the packs of gangbangers that roamed the streets of D.C. With his size and speed, few people toyed with him, but the muggers of D.C. cared little about size. The second most traumatic event in O'Rourke's life had proved that. 1 year earlier, Michael's best friend had been shot and killed just 2 blocks from the Capitol. Mark Coleman and O'Rourke worked on Senator Olson's staff and were roommates. One night, Coleman was on his way home from work when he was stopped by a 22-year-old crack addict. A witness saw the shaky young man walk up to Coleman and without saying a word, shoot him in the chest, grab his wallet, and run. The police caught the man the next day. The murderer had already been convicted of armed robbery twice, but was paroled early because of a lack of space in D.C. jails. O'Rourke tried to understand what was happening to America, why someone like Mark Coleman, who'd worked so hard, who'd lived honestly, whose whole life was ahead of him, could be snuffed out by a crack addict. O'Rourke thought of all the meetings he'd sat in, where fat cat senators and congressmen threw around billions of tax dollars to support some special interest group whose endorsement would be needed in the next election. When the subject of crime came up, it was talked about with enthusiasm and vigor, especially when the press was around. But behind the closed doors of committee meetings, the politicians were always more willing to spend money on farm subsidies or defense spending than crime. The reality of life had smacked O'Rourke harshly in the face that day. He looked at Washington and knew there was no way he could make a difference. The corruption of the system had become too entrenched. The old boys controlled the committees, and with that, the legislative agenda and the purse strings. O'Rourke had decided at that moment 1 year earlier that he was done with Washington. As O'Rourke turned into Wisconsin Avenue, his mind returned to the present. He noted for the first time since taking office that real change might be possible. The shocking assassination of 3 of Washington's most prominent political animals was sure to force reform to the forefront. O'Rourke walked across the street to Blackie's bar. Glancing over the crowd, he looked for a full head of black hair, and after 2 sweeps, he found her. She was sitting at the far end of the bar, surrounded by a group of men. The sight of her brought a smile to his face. O'Rourke weaved his way through the crowd and stood behind the pack of cruisers, salivating over his girlfriend. He placed his hands on the shoulders of the 2 men closest to him. "Excuse me, gentlemen." O'Rourke stepped forward to kiss her on the lips. "You look great. Our table's ready. Let's go be alone." The couple walked over to an open booth and sat down across from each other. O'Rourke stared at her. He loved her eyes.
He loved everything about her, her thick black hair, her olive skin, her sharp mind, her great sense of humor. She was everything he wanted. Liz Scarlatti had entered his life a year ago, and even though the last thing he wanted was a relationship, he couldn't resist her. Marriage was on the horizon. There was only one problem at present. Michael wanted out of D.C., and Liz wasn't sure. She'd worked hard to get where she was, and wasn't quite sure she was ready to give it up and move to Minnesota. Scarlatti smiled at O'Rourke. "So, did you see me on TV yesterday?" "What was that all about? You know how much I hate publicity." "Mr. President, Congressman O'Rourke says your budget is stuffed with more pork than a Jimmy Dean sausage. Come on, Liz, I had reporters calling my office all afternoon." "Well, I'm sorry, Michael, you're a public figure. What you say is news. By the way, congratulations. You were the only one who challenged him. The rest of those pansies rolled over and gave him easy questions." Scarlatti and O'Rourke were glancing at their menus and discussing the assassinations when the subdued roar of the Friday night crowd dropped to a hushed silence. When they looked up, the president's face was on every TV in the bar.
"Good evening. I will be brief and to the point tonight. It's with deep sorrow that I come to you to discuss a great loss to our nation. These three statesmen have given over 80 years of service to the people of America. Between them, they authored hundreds of bills that have helped make America a better place to live and work. Congressman Kozlowski, Senator Fitzgerald, and Senator Downs were not perfect. None of us are. Yet they overcame their imperfections and gave everything they had to their country and to their fellow countrymen. For this, we will always be indebted to them. We in the nation's capital are in shock over the senseless, violent murders that were committed this morning. Many of you are aware of this letter that was received by the media today. The FBI has informed me there's a very good chance this letter is from the group that committed the murders. The FBI also believes there's a very good chance this letter was sent as a piece of disinformation, sent to lead the investigation in the wrong direction. Due to the investigation taking place, I cannot expand on this. All I can say is that FBI Director Roach has assured me that the terrorists who killed these men will be caught and brought to justice. The people who committed this crime represent the antithesis of democracy. They represent tyranny. What happened this morning was not just the murder of three important politicians. It was an attack on the United States of America. It was an assault on the ideals of democracy. If you, the American people, want to make changes in the way your government is run, those changes must take place in a peaceful and democratic way. The people who committed these crimes are terrorists and cowards. I will not deal with terrorists. Throughout our history, we've been faced with great trials and tribulations. We have, as a nation, always risen above these obstacles and emerged stronger. Next week, we will, as a nation, bury these three honorable men. We will mourn their deaths as a country. And then we will do as they would have wished. We will push on. We will persevere. We will overcome. Good night, and may God bless each of you.
In Blackie's, the roar of conversation had returned as the patrons discussed the events of the day and the president's speech. O'Rourke was intentionally keeping his mouth shut as Scarlatti stared at him. "Michael, you know, I'm dying to hear what you have to say about this whole thing." "About what?" "Don't play coy with me, Michael. I'm serious. I really want to know what you think about this. I mean, it isn't every day two senators and a congressman get assassinated. In a nutshell, Liz, I think Kozlowski, Downs, and Fitzgerald were the scum of the earth, and I'm not so sure these assassins aren't doing us all a huge favor. Doesn't it worry you at all, as a congressman, that these terrorists may turn the gun on you eventually?" "No, there are bigger fish to fry than me. Besides, I'm not so sure they're terrorists. It's an overused cliché, but one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter." "Well, from what the president just said, there's reason to believe that letter is a fake." "Come on, Liz, you're a reporter. Do you really believe a word that comes out of Stephen's mouth? The White House is already trying to spin this thing, and they don't even know what's going on. I would have thought that you, of all people, Mr. Law and Order, would have been denouncing what happened today. I mean, I'm the liberal. I'm supposed to be supporting anarchy, not you." "This isn't anarchy, Liz. It may be a revolt, but it's not anarchy. Besides, you're a member of the press. You're supposed to be neutral, remember?" Special Agent McMahon was sitting at the head of the table in a conference room down the hall from his office. He was staring at the TV in disbelief. The president had just finished his address to the nation, and McMahon did not like what he had heard. He grabbed the phone and dialed Roach's office. The director answered.
Hello?
What in the hell was that all about?
I have no idea.
Has anyone from the Bureau told them we believe the letter is a piece of disinformation?
No.
You didn't actually promise him that we would catch these guys, did you?
Skip, you know better than that.
What in the hell is going on? The President, Garrett, Hopkinson, Speaker Bassett, Senator Lloyd Hellerman, and a half-dozen secretaries and aides were crowded around the conference table in the cabinet room. They were scrambling to put together a media strategy that would help make the best of a dire situation. Most of the men in the room were aware of the nation's overall distrust of politicians, but none of them had imagined how bad it had gotten. Hopkinson was starting to get polling information back, and it was shocking. Almost 40% of those questioned believed the country would be better off without Fitzgerald, Kozlowski, and Downs. When Garrett heard the news, he had snickered. Let's see where those numbers are on Monday. The reason he was so confident was because his phone had been ringing off the hook since the president's speech. Americans loved a conspiracy. They would eat up the idea that the letter was sent to confuse the FBI, and that the murders were committed in connection with a dark plot. The seeds had been planted, and the notorious rumor mill of D.C. and the media would take care of the rest. Speaker Bassett was the featured guest on Inside Washington, a Sunday political talk show. Michael O'Rourke sat in his living room with Liz and Seamus. Seamus had arrived earlier that morning. Michael and Seamus watched the broadcast with irritation while Liz was busy pecking notes into her laptop. She had a column that was supposed to be on her editor's desk by 5 p.m. The one woman on the panel started to ask a question.
Mr. Speaker, I know this must be a very difficult time for you and your colleagues. It is a horrible tragedy that 3 of our country's elder statesmen have been assassinated, but maybe some good can come of it if it forces you and the rest of your colleagues to make some overdue and needed reforms.
Bassett took a deep breath. They had anticipated a question along these lines, and Garrett had helped prepare an answer.
I would like you to try and tell the wives, children, and grandchildren of those 3 men what good could possibly come from this.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not saying that this isn't a horrible tragedy. What I am asking is, what is it going to take for the leaders of this country to implement the reforms that the American people want?
We do not even know if these demands are sincere. As I've told you, the FBI believes the intent of that letter to be bogus. And besides, I resent the fact that we have not even had time to bury these honorable men, and you're talking about kowtowing to the demands of their murderers.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not talking about kowtowing to anyone. I'm only asking if you plan to implement certain reforms.
I can answer absolutely and emphatically, no. The government of the United States of America has never and will never negotiate with terrorists.
So, you plan on doing nothing, Mr. Speaker?
No, I plan on bringing the House back into session as soon as we're done paying respect to our fallen colleagues. And then we will pass the president's budget. A budget that, I might add, the American people want.
O'Rourke got off the couch and tossed the remote control on Liz's lap. What's it going to take for these guys to learn? Seamus, you want to go for a walk? Michael's grandfather nodded. Honey, we'll be back in an hour or so. Seamus, Michael, and Duke left the house. When they reached the sidewalk, Michael said, There's something we really need to talk about. Does it have anything to do with what you mentioned on the phone the other day? Yes. Remember the hunting trip we went on last year with... Don't mention any names. With all of these damn embassies around here, the FBI, the CIA, the NSA, and all of the defense intelligence agencies, it's a wonder any conversation takes place in this town without being recorded. Well, you know who I'm talking about. On that trip, I gave him some highly sensitive information about a senator who cost the lives of half the men in his unit. I think he might be involved in these assassinations. And? You don't think it's a big deal? Yes, I think it's a big deal, Michael. The problem today is that men like Kozlowski, Fitzgerald, and Downs, the old guard, they control the system. They're the reason we're $5 trillion in debt. And I couldn't be happier that they're dead. I'm not sad they're dead either. I've seen the way they do business. My problem is that I'm not entirely comfortable with the idea that I may have set this whole thing in motion by relaying a highly classified piece of information that I wasn't even supposed to know. We went over this before you told him. You commanded a recon unit when you were in the Corps.
If some politician compromised the mission that you and your men were on because he had one too many martinis, and his loose lips led to the deaths of half your unit, wouldn't you want to know? Yes. That's all the farther you need to look, Michael. Have you talked to anyone else about this? No. Good. Keep it under your hat. If our boys behind this were fortunate, this is the first chance we've had for real change in 30 years. I agree. It's just that something like this could spin out of control real fast, and I don't want to see him get taken down. Don't worry. He isn't going to get caught. He's been doing this for years in places a hell of a lot more dangerous than the United States. Garrett was sitting in his office with his feet up on the desk and an array of newspapers before him. It was just after 6 on Monday morning, and his plan was coming along nicely. He snickered at how easy it was to manipulate the media. The front page of the Washington Post read, "Murky conspiracy rumored to be behind murders." The front page of the New York Times read, "FBI thinks murders were committed to stop President's budget." Garrett laughed out loud. It had been so easy. It made no difference if it was made up or not. The damage had been done. The American people would read the headlines and believe what they saw. Public support would rally back to the president, and they would ride it into a second term. Garrett's plan was simple. All he had to do was continue to portray the president as a victim, and hope those idiots over at the FBI could catch these people. He smiled at how easy it was to play the power game against principled men like Roach. While they took the time to decide if a course of action was right or wrong, Garrett worried only about being caught. The sun had risen, and down in the sub-basement of the White House, a Secret Service agent opened an obscure door for Stu Garrett. The president's chief of staff walked in and sat down next to another Secret Service agent. Garrett grabbed a pair of headphones and put them on as he looked up at the bank of monitors. President Stevens was standing in front of the fireplace in the Oval Office, waiting for his breakfast appointment. A moment later, the door opened and Senator Olson entered the room. The president walked over and shook his guest's hand. "Good morning, Eric." Garrett could hear them talking as easily as if he were standing right next to the two men. President Stevens led Olson over to a table that had been set for breakfast. "Eric, I would like you to know that I'm happy you've made the effort to come see me, especially in light of the poor working relationship between our two parties. Mr. President, I'm here this morning because I'm very concerned about what might happen if certain members of my party propose that we implement some of the things this group is asking for. Considering the philosophical tenets of your party and the stress that we're all under, I can see where that might become a possibility, one that I would not welcome. Mr. President, last Friday we started a new chapter in our country's history, one that is potentially very dangerous. The idea that one small group can dictate, through violence, the policies of this country runs against all the democratic principles upon which our country was founded. These acts of terrorism absolutely cannot be tolerated if we want to leave a civilized and democratic nation for future generations. As you said, the relations between our parties have been very strained. Much of that has to do with the recent fight over your budget. It is my feeling that we must put those differences aside and move forward with a unified front. There will be some compromises that will have to be reached, but the important thing is that we cannot, for a minute, entertain the idea of appeasing these terrorists." "I agree. Appeasement's out of the question. That's been my official position from the outset. What do you propose our course of action to be?" "Well, I think we need to bring the leaders of both parties together and discuss what needs to be changed in your budget to guarantee a swift and resounding passage through both the House and the Senate." "Eric, I had enough votes to get my budget passed before this whole debacle started. I'm not so sure I need to change it." "Sir, if your budget was put to a vote today, it wouldn't stand a chance of getting out of the House. Kozlowski and Bassett are gone, and these assassinations have scared the hell out of the remaining congressmen. The only thing that will get your budget passed is a strong, unified front from both parties, and that means some deals will have to be struck. I'm not saying that drastic changes need to be made, only that you will have to meet us halfway." The president nodded his head. The proposal was beginning to make sense. The two statesmen continued to discuss the formation of their new alliance, while several floors beneath the meeting, the wheels were spinning in Garrett's head. This might be the perfect way out. Go on television. Show a unified front with the president standing in the middle, holding both parties together. Stevens would look stronger than ever.
At 8 p.m., Hopkinson signaled the producers to go live. A moment later, the president entered the room with the ranking members of both parties following closely behind. The president took his place behind the podium, and the party leaders fell in. With the look of a general about to go into battle, Stevens started his speech.
Good evening, my fellow Americans. The group that stands with me tonight represents the two parties that have helped shape America and make it great. During normal times, it would be very difficult to get us to agree on almost anything. But when the very fabric that our democracy was woven from is threatened, we agree without a single deviance. We will not cower to the demands of terrorists. The survival of this country's democratic principles is far more important than our individual beliefs. Tomorrow afternoon, I will fly to Camp David with the leaders of both the House and the Senate. We will spend the weekend going over my budget and putting together a bipartisan agenda for the following year. And we will not be blackmailed by terrorists.
As the president continued to speak, the blonde-haired assassin looked at the TV and began to form a mental checklist of the things he would have to do before the sun arose. The assassin sat in his car across the street from the local ABC studio. Just after midnight, the van that was assigned to the White House drove into the underground garage. The assassin waited for another 20 minutes, then got out of the car, grabbing the video camera and backpack. As he walked across the street, he put the camera on his right shoulder and tilted his head down. The brim of his hat and the camera screened his face. On his way through the front door, he passed a female reporter and cameraman on their way out. They were both wearing red Gore-Tex ski jackets with the ABC logo. The assassin kept his head down and headed for the stairs to the underground parking garage. When he reached the garage, he waved to the security guard. The man had his feet up on the desk and was watching TV. He casually looked up and, seeing the red jacket and camera, turned his attention back to the TV. The assassin walked through the row of vans and cars and stopped when he reached the one with the right license plate. It took him less than 30 seconds to pick the lock. Casually, he slid the door open and climbed in. He grabbed an electric screwdriver out of his backpack and went to work. A minute later, he popped the cover off the control board and started searching for the right wires. After finding them, he spliced several wires and attached a transponder. When he was done, he stepped out of the van and locked the door. Once again, he walked by the window on his way to the stairs. Outside, the assassin climbed behind the wheel of the Ford Taurus and drove west through downtown. It was almost 1 a.m. and the traffic was light. Several minutes later, he was winding through the neighborhood of Potomac Palisades. When he reached the corner of Potomac Avenue and Manning Place Lane, he parked the car and got out. The temperature had dropped to around 40 degrees. The forecast called for fog in the morning, but there was no sign of it where he was, high on the bluffs above the Potomac. On the other side of the street was a steep hill that led down to the Potomac Parkway, and then just beyond that to Palisades Park and the Potomac River. He crossed the street, and finding a small footpath that he had used before, he zigzagged his way down the hillside. He darted across the two-lane highway and down into a small ravine. Settling in behind a large tree, he looked up at the underside of the chain bridge, which ran from D.C. into Virginia. Palisades Park was not your typical metropolitan park. There were no softball diamonds or football fields. It was heavily wooded with a few jogging trails and some large patches of marshland. The assassin checked the time. It was nearing 2 a.m., and his accomplices would be arriving shortly. The noise of car tires on gravel caught his attention, and he looked over the edge of the ravine. A blue and white Washington Post newspaper van came to a stop, and a man got out of the passenger side and slid open the door of the cargo area. Reaching inside, he grabbed 2 large duffel bags and ran to the tree line, setting the bags down about 15 feet from where the blonde-haired assassin was waiting. The man let out 3 curt whistles and climbed back in the van. Picking up the 2 bags, the assassin threaded through the woods and crossed under the chain bridge. As the assassin worked his way toward the river, the trees became smaller and more sparse. By the time he reached the middle of the bridge, the fog was up to his waist. Turning south, he walked about 30 yards and found a small clearing. He set both bags down and opened the one on his right. Inside was a small gray radar dish mounted on a square metal box, a car battery, some power cables, and camouflage netting. The assassin hooked the car battery up to the radar unit and covered it with the camouflage netting. He opened the second bag, pulling out a wooden board about 3 feet long. Attached to the flat side of the board were 6 plastic tubes about 1 inch in diameter and 24 inches long. Each tube was loaded with a phosphorus flare. He pulled some small bushes out of the ground and placed them around the tubes, so the open ends were pointed straight up into the sky. To the base of the makeshift launcher, he attached a 9-volt battery and a small transponder. The assassin checked everything over, then grabbed the empty bags and started back toward the eastern end of the bridge. The morning sun was invisible because of the thick fog that blanketed the nation's capital. Although the streets were quiet, there were signs that the morning rush of people heading to work was near. The blue and white newspaper van pulled up to the corner of Maryland and Massachusetts. Both men got out of the van. The driver opened the back doors, and his partner walked over to the Washington Post newspaper box that was chained to the streetlight. He got down on one knee and picked the padlock. A moment later, it sprang open. He grabbed the box and carried it to the back of the van. While he loaded it, his partner took an identical box and placed it where the other one had been. He checked several times to make sure the door wouldn't open. After being satisfied, he pulled a remote control out of his pocket and punched in several numbers. A red light at the top told him the small radar unit placed inside the empty box was receiving the signal. He nodded to his partner and they got back in the van. They were thankful for the cover that the fog provided, but were getting anxious. They would have liked to have started this part of the operation earlier, but were forced to wait until the real Washington Post vans had delivered Friday morning's edition. With one more drop left, they drove around the south end of Stanton Park and headed west. The driver pulled up to the southeast corner of 14th Street and Constitution Avenue. The White House was less than 2 blocks away. Both men got out to repeat the drill for the last time. This was the 5th and final radar unit. With the final 2 units in place, the trap was completed. Quantico Marine Air Station is located approximately 30 miles southwest of Washington, D.C. The air station is divided into 2 parts, the green side and the white side. The green side supports the base's normal Marine aviation squadrons, and the white side supports the Special Marine HMX-1 squadron. The HMX-1 squadron's primary function is to provide helicopter transportation for the President and other high-ranking executive office officials. The squadron's main bird is the VH-3 helicopter. The VH-3s at HMX-1 are not painted your typical drab green. They are painted glossy green on the bottom half and glossy white on top. The presidential seal adorns both sides of the aircraft, and inside the cabin are state-of-the-art communications equipment and plush flight chairs. The helicopter is typically referred to as Marine One, in the same way the President's 747 is referred to as Air Force One. 10 of the VH-3s at HMX-1 were to be used in today's flight operations, and their flight crews were busy checking every inch of the choppers, prepping them for the flight. It was just after 8 a.m., and the rising sun had burned off most of the fog. A total of 40 of the dull green monsters were flying up from Jacksonville, North Carolina, 4 for each of the VH-3s that would be ferrying the President and his guests from the White House to Camp David. The doors to the hangar were open, and the roar of helicopters could be heard in the distance. The choppers were spaced in 300-foot intervals, and the columns stretched for over 2 miles. One by one, they descended onto the tarmac. Jack Warch climbed up the last flight of stairs and onto the roof of the White House. Special Agents Sally Manley and Joe Steiner followed. Late the previous evening, they had met to discuss security arrangements, and Warch had recommended to the President that the meetings be held at the White House instead of Camp David. Garrett had shot the idea down before the President had a chance to think it over. Garrett had said, "Jim, the public needs to see that you're not confined to the White House. And besides, Camp David is more secure than the White House." It was debatable whether Camp David or the White House was more secure, but that wasn't the issue. The real security threat came in flying the President from the White House to Camp David. It worried Warch that, as usual, the President's itinerary was public information. The assassins would know approximately when the President was leaving the White House and when he would be arriving at Camp David. In Warch's line of work, he had to assume the worst. For that reason, he was taking extra precautions. Warch looked down at the reporters and photographers who were staking out positions on the west side of the South Lawn. Warch shook his head in frustration. If he had it his way, he'd ban them from the White House compound. they did nothing but make his job more difficult. It was 10:48 a.m., and the President's weekend guests were starting to arrive for the 11 o'clock lunch and photo op. Warch looked at the news vans that were parked off to the side and pointed at them. "Joe, remind Kathy and Jack to do a lockdown on those vans and take them off their live feeds before the first chopper lands. That's before, not during." HMX-1 did not have a briefing room large enough to accommodate all 100 pilots involved in today's flight operations, so folding chairs were set up in the corner of the hangar. With the advent of shoulder-launched surface-to-air missiles, such as the American Stinger, the Secret Service had been forced to find a safer way to transport the President on board Marine One. In times of heightened security, they implemented what the Marine pilots referred to as the shell game. Multiple Marine Ones would land, one at a time, at the White House or wherever the President was, and then take off, every helicopter heading in a different direction. The intended result was to confuse any would-be terrorist or assassin about which helicopter the President was on. When the President's itinerary was known in advance, and there was a heightened terrorist alert, HMX-1 called in the CH-53s for escort duty. Escort was a kind description for the Super Stallion's job. The pilots of the drab-green helicopters knew their real job was to shield the President's helicopter from a missile. This was accomplished by flying in a tight formation, with Marine One in the middle, surrounded by 4 Super Stallions. After the weather briefing was finished, the squadron commander took over. 10 VH-3s were flying today, and they were designated by their order of takeoff as Marine 1, Marine 2, Marine 3, and so on. For training purposes, the CH-53s were already split into groups of 4. The first 4 that landed were to escort Marine 1. The second 4 were to escort Marine 2, and so on. The batting order was announced, and each division, which consisted of 1 VH-3 and 4 CH-53s, was given its bearing on which it was to leave the White House. Because it would take almost 20 minutes from the time the first VH-3 took off from the South Lawn to the time the last one did, the divisions were given different flight paths from the White House to Camp David. If all 10 divisions left the White House and flew along the same flight path, it would give a terrorist time to move into position and take a shot at one of the later groups. The blonde-haired assassin was wearing contact lenses that made his blue eyes look brown. Once again, his face, neck, and hands were covered with brown makeup, and a short afro wig was covering his hair. He exited George Washington Memorial Parkway and pulled the maroon van into the Glebe Nature Center. Finding a space close to the edge of the riverbank, he parked the van by a small stone wall. About a mile to his south was the Key Bridge, and below him and just to the north was the Chain Bridge. Climbing into the back of the van, he turned on the control board and monitors. The van had been purchased with cash from a bankrupt TV station in Cleveland 4 months earlier. The small satellite dish on the roof pulled in the broadcast signals from the 3 networks and CNN. He was only concerned with CNN's and ABC's broadcasts. He put those 2 on the top monitors. CNN was giving a live update from the South Lawn, while ABC was still showing its regularly scheduled program. Reaching to his right, he dialed ABC's live feed frequency into the receiver. After some fine-tuning, the picture became clear. The White House correspondent for CNN was speaking from the South Lawn.
The President's guests have been arriving now for the last 15 minutes or so. Security is very tight, and tensions seem to be running high. The President is scheduled to sit down for a light lunch with the leaders of both parties shortly. After lunch, probably sometime around noon, they will be boarding helicopters and flying to Camp David.
The anchor in Atlanta thanked the reporter for the story and broke away for a commercial. The assassin checked his watch. It would be another hour before the action started. Jack Warch entered the room. Agents Manley and Steiner walked around the table and handed each person a piece of paper. "Ladies and gentlemen, this sheet lists which helicopter you will be flying on and who you will be flying with. If you'll notice, the President is not on this list, and there's no one listed as flying on the last helicopter. For security reasons, we will not announce which helicopter the President will be on until the last minute. If we decide to put him on the first helicopter, all of you will be bumped to the next chopper. And if we decide to put him on the 5th helicopter, Those flying on helicopters 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 will be bumped to the next flight. The helicopters will be coming in at quick intervals, so I would ask that you be ready to go when your helicopter lands. Sir, that's all I have for now." The President thanked Warch, and the agents left the room. The elderly gentleman parked his rental car by the front gate of Arlington National Cemetery. On the lapel of his trench coat was a veteran's pin and an American flag. He smiled and nodded to the guard at the main gate as he entered the cemetery and started the climb up the hill to Robert E. Lee's house. When he reached the front yard of Lee's house, he turned and looked to the east. Beneath him, across the river and beyond the Lincoln Memorial, he could see the White House. He heard a rumble in the distance and turned to the south. Beyond Washington National Airport, he saw the first formation of helicopters moving up the Potomac. The 4 large, dull green helicopters surrounded the single, shiny, green and white presidential helicopter. The noise of their engines and the thumping of the rotor blades echoed throughout the valley. From his perch on the roof of the White House, Warch could see and hear the helicopters just to his south. Agent Steiner was scanning the surrounding rooftops with his binoculars, and Warch tapped him on the shoulder. "Joe, tell Kathy and Jack to take the networks off their live feed." Steiner lowered his binoculars and spoke into his mic. Special Agents Kathy Legeski and Steve Hampson were standing by the news vans talking to each other when they received the order from Steiner. Without pause, Legeski and Hampson went to work. Legeski started with the CNN van. "Tony, we have to take you off the air." The producer nodded, and Legeski watched as he turned off the power on the transmitter that sent out the live signal. After the producer was finished, he stepped out of the van, and Legeski shut the door. Steiner informed Warch that the networks were off their live feed, and the special agent in charge looked down at the news vans and then up at the first group of helicopters, hovering less than a mile away. Agent Manley asked Warch, "Which bird do you want to put Tiger on?" Tiger was the code name used for the president. "Let's go with number 3. Don't let anyone know until number 2 lands." The old man leaned against a tree and looked intently at the 5 helicopters hovering by the Jefferson Memorial. The choppers started to move north toward the White House, and the old man pulled a digital phone out of his pocket, punched in a phone number, and hit the send button. He let the phone ring 4 times and hung up. The assassin looked at the digital phone and counted the rings. When it stopped after the 4th one, he dialed in a frequency code and pressed the send button. The signal was received less than a second later, and the transponder that was planted in the ABC van the previous evening kicked in. The power to the transmitter was restored, and the live feed was back online. A couple of seconds later, the bottom left monitor went from a fuzzy gray picture back to a clear picture of the South Lawn. Warch watched the helicopters as they flew toward the White House. The lead super stallion hovered directly over Warch's head as the shiny green and white VH-3 in the middle landed gently. The 4 super stallions held their positions hovering about 200 feet above the ground. Warch watched 8 Secret Service agents escort the first 2 passengers to the VH-3. The executive helicopter gracefully lifted off the ground and stopped at an altitude even with her escorts. Then all 5 helicopters banked to the right and headed northeast. The next formation swooped in over the South Lawn a little faster than the first. Once again, the passengers were escorted to the chopper. Warch looked at Manley. "Is Tiger ready?" Manley nodded yes. President Stevens strode across the South Lawn. Surrounding him were 6 Secret Service agents, the one just behind him carrying a bulletproof trench coat, ready to throw it over the president at the slightest sign of trouble. Garrett walked on the left side of the president so as to avoid getting between his boss and the cameras. Stevens smiled broadly and waved to the cameras and reporters. As they reached the helicopter, Stevens snapped off a sharp salute to the Marine in dress blues standing at the foot of the steps. The digital phone started to ring in the old man's pocket. He made no attempt to answer it. The call was a signal telling him that the president was on board the helicopter that was about to rise back into the formation. After the 3rd ring, he opened the left side of his trench coat. Taped to the inside of his jacket was a small black box. The face of it contained a number pad, an enter button, and a power switch. The old man flipped the power switch to the on position, then returned his attention to the helicopters hovering over the White House. He saw the green and white VH-3 rise into the air and punched 2 numbers into the remote, but did not hit the enter button. He had to wait until the formation started to move, otherwise the president's helicopter would drop straight back down into the cover of the White House compound. The helicopters began to move. The old man hit the enter button and said a quick prayer. The signal was received a second later by the tiny surface-to-air radar unit that had been placed in the newspaper box 2 blocks to the south of the White House. The unit immediately started to sweep its wide-band search radar over the helicopters. The band narrowed from acquisition to track to fire control. Inside the cockpits of all 5 helicopters, missile warning lights began flashing, and the onboard threat sensors came screeching to life. The wailing of the threat sensor told them that they were being illuminated by fire control radar. There was no time to think, only time to react as their training had taught them. Their threat sensors informed them that they were being illuminated from behind, and within seconds all 5 helicopters increased power and moved forward, dropping to as low an altitude as possible. The co-pilots hit their flare dispenser buttons, hoping to confuse an approaching heat-seeking missile. Jack Warch felt his heart climb into his throat as he saw the flares come shooting out of the tails of the helicopters. The choppers moved above his head, straining to gain speed, their bright red flares streaming down. The seconds seemed like minutes as he waited to see a red streak and then an explosion. He ran to the north side of the roof, following the choppers. About a half-mile away from the White House, the formation banked hard to the left, and Warch lost sight of it. Atop the hill at Arlington, the old man tracked the helicopters as they scrambled for safety. He punched in the codes for radar units that had been placed to the east and north of the White House. Seconds later, the helicopters picked up the azimuth of the new threats and banked hard to the left. Heading due west, they raced over the rooftops of downtown. The old man punched in the codes for the last 2 radar units. They immediately started sweeping the horizon from the west and southwest with their search radar. The trap was complete. As the pilots reached the Potomac River, they did exactly what their instincts and training had taught them. They skimmed over the top of the Key Bridge and dove almost 200 feet to the deck. The formation pulled up dangerously close to the waters of the Potomac and raced northward, underneath the coverage of the radars that had been harassing them. The warning lights on their dashboards subsided, and the shrill of the threat sensors ceased. The assassin pressed in the code for the flare launchers and radar unit. He placed his thumb over the enter button and waited. When the lead super stallion was about 200 yards from the bridge, he hit the button. The radar powered up and immediately narrowed its search to fire control. Again, the threat sensors on board the choppers came howling to life. Seconds later, all 6 of the red flares snaked their way out of the tubes and into the sky, leaving a trail of smoke behind. The combination of the visual threat of the red streaks and the fact that the pilots thought they were locked onto by a surface-to-air missile caused the lead pilot to do what came naturally. He'd been trained for almost 50 hours in close formation escort duty, but he'd also been trained for well over 200 hours in missile evasion tactics. And there was nothing more unnatural for a pilot to do than fly a straight and steady course when being tracked by fire control radar. So he jerked his stick to the left. Upon seeing and hearing the danger that was ahead, the other 3 Super Stallion pilots had already started to loosen the formation. And when the lead escort broke left, the other 3 scattered, as much out of the fear of a mid-air collision as their desire to evade what they thought was an approaching missile. This left Marine 1 alone in the middle of the river, a sitting duck. Gripping the controls, the pilots of Marine 1 braced themselves for impact and cursed their escorts for abandoning them. The old man was behind the wheel of his rental car and driving across the Arlington Memorial Bridge. When he reached the east side, he headed north. Exiting off the parkway, he entered the Foggy Bottom neighborhood of Washington, D.C., less than a mile from the White House. It was just past 12:30, and the streets and sidewalks were crowded with people. After finding a spot, he got out. 2 blocks later, he found the pre-selected payphone, inserted a quarter, and punched in a phone number. After several rings, a voice answered.
Hello, you've reached Special Agent Skip McMahon. If you'd like to leave a message, please do so at the beep. If you need to speak to one of my assistants, press 0.
The old man pulled a dictaphone out of his pocket, placed the speaker up to the phone, and pressed play.
Special Agent McMahon, we know you have been placed in charge of investigating the assassinations of Senator Fitzgerald, Congressman Kozlowski, and Senator Downs. We are sending you this message because we do not want to fight our battle in the media. We suggest the President and his people follow suit. We are in possession of several Stinger missiles and could have easily blown Marine One out of the sky this afternoon. You can tell the President that the only reason he is still alive is because we did not want to kill the Marines and Secret Service agents on board. If you continue to ignore our demands and manipulate public opinion through the media, we will have no choice but to escalate our war. So far, we have assassinated only elected officials, but we are adding the names of Stu Garrett and Ted Hopkinson to our list of targets. We are very well informed about what goes on inside the Stevens administration, and know that these two men are responsible for most of the lies that have been spoon-fed to the media over the last week. If you continue to label us as terrorists and the President as the noble defender of the Constitution, you will die. This is our last warning. No matter what they tell you, Mr. President, the Secret Service cannot protect you from us. This is your last warning.
Marine One landed on the helicopter pad at Camp David, and a pale-faced President Stevens was draped in his bulletproof trench coat and rushed into a waiting Suburban. No one spoke as the truck sped up the tree-lined path. The Suburban stopped in front of the cabin, and again Stevens was rushed inside. The President looked to the senior agent.
How did they know which helicopter I was on?
We don't know, sir. Stevens said nothing. The murders of Fitzgerald and the others flashed across his mind, and he realized for the first time just how vulnerable he was. Garrett arrived minutes after the President and went straight to the conference room. He grabbed the nearest phone and punched in the number for Ted Hopkinson's office. Hopkinson's secretary answered.
Get me Ted.
As each second passed, Garrett became more and more irritated. According to Garrett's watch, he'd been on hold for 2 minutes and 13 seconds when Hopkinson finally came on the line.
Where in the hell have you been?
Stu, it's a zoo around here. The press is crawling all over the place. They want to know what the hell is going on. We've got to get control of this thing.
Yeah, I know. We're going to have to put him on TV. Grab a cameraman and a reporter from the press pool and get your ass up here.
I can't. The Secret Service has shut the compound down. They're not letting anyone come or go.
Screw the damn Secret Service. You find Warch and tell him I said if he wants to keep his job, to get a chopper for you pronto.
The scene at the Chain Bridge was intense, to say the least. The media, the Metro Police, the Virginia State Police, and the FBI had all descended on the scene within minutes of each other. Skip McMahon stood looking over the south edge of the Chain Bridge, watching Kathy Jennings and 2 other agents inspect the devices they'd found. Warch had to brief the President on what had happened, and during the short flight to Camp David, he'd prepared himself for what he knew was an assured confrontation with Garrett. He'd put up with Garrett's reckless and unprofessional abuse for almost 3 years, and now was the time to put an end to it. He knew exactly how to handle it. Special Agent Terry Andrews was waiting for Warch on the porch of the main cabin when the Suburban pulled up. Warch walked up the steps.
Where's Garrett? He's in the conference room with Hopkinson, trying to figure out how they're going to spin this story to the media. I tell you, Jack, it takes all the strength I have not to crack that damn idiot across the head. He's been screaming his head off for the last hour, demanding to know what's going on. He told me the Secret Service is going to pay for this.
We'll see. The 2 men walked into the cabin and down the hall to the conference room. Warch opened the door and entered first. Garrett was standing over Hopkinson's shoulder. He looked up.
It's about time you got here. You'd better have some answers for me.
Warch ignored Garrett and looked at Hopkinson. Ted, would you please excuse us?
Anything you have to say to me, Ted can hear.
Not this. This is for your ears only. Ted, please excuse us. This will only take a minute. Terry, you too. Hopkinson and Andrews headed for the door, leaving Warch and Garrett alone.
You better have some answers for me. You almost got my ass and the President's blown out of the sky.
Garrett continued to bark while Warch walked toward him. Garrett took a step forward and pointed his finger at Warch.
Heads are going to roll over this one, Warch, and yours is at the top of the...
Warch slammed him into the wall. Stu, I think it's about time you and I had a man-to-man talk. I'm finished taking your shit.
And my people are done taking your shit. We're sick and tired of your emotional outbursts. Today's little ride up to Camp David was your idea. I told you it was an unnecessary risk, but you went ahead, and for your own stupid reasons convinced the president that he should have the meeting up here. It was your idea, Stu, so I don't want to hear you say another word about it, or I'm going to start airing some of your dirty laundry in the press. No heads are going to roll. You are not going to ruin my career or any of my people's. In fact, you're going to start treating them with respect, because if you don't, I'm going to leak the story of how you and Mike Nance blackmailed Congressman Moore. That's right, Stu. I know all about the little arrangement you and Nance had with Arthur Higgins. I'll make a deal with you, Stu. From now on, you start listening to me when it comes to security issues. What I say goes, and I don't want to see any more juvenile tirades. You start treating me and my people with the respect they deserve and we'll get along fine. But I'm warning you, Stu, don't piss me off again or I'll turn everything I have over to the FBI. And believe me, there are plenty of people at the Bureau who would love to take a bite out of your ass. Michael was parked in front of an apartment building in the Adams-Morgan neighborhood of D.C. He looked down at his digital phone and then up at the Ford Explorer that was parked 3 cars ahead of him. It belonged to the man he wanted to talk to. O'Rourke had already called up to the apartment twice and had got the answering machine both times. O'Rourke was growing impatient. 5 minutes and a half a cup of coffee later, he saw a man with a baseball cap and a large backpack over his shoulder round the corner. Michael got out of his truck. You're awfully hard to get hold of. I've called 12 times in the last 3 days. Sorry, I've been awfully busy. The man, who was 6 years Michael's elder, glanced up and down the street with his alert eyes. Michael looked around. Am I keeping you from something? I have a lot to do today, but I can always spare a few minutes for my little brother's best friend. The man standing before O'Rourke was Scott Coleman, the older brother of Mark Coleman, O'Rourke's best friend who was killed a year earlier. Scott Coleman was the former commander of SEAL Team 6, America's premier counterterrorism unit. He also happened to be the person Michael had been worrying about since last Friday. Coleman had left the SEALs almost a year ago after a highly decorated 16-year stint. Despite his illustrious career, he did not leave on a happy note. He had lost half of his SEAL team in a mission over northern Libya. Upon returning from the mission, Coleman was informed that their assault on a terrorist training camp had been compromised because a high-profile politician had leaked the mission. When his superiors refused to reveal the identity of the politician, Coleman resigned in disgust. O'Rourke had found out through Senator Olson, who was the chairman of the Joint Intelligence Committee, that Senator Fitzgerald was the person in question. Michael had labored as to whether he should tell Coleman. They'd grown closer since the death of Mark Coleman, and while on a hunting trip the previous fall, Michael finally decided to confide in the warrior. Coleman had taken the news about Fitzgerald in silence, and that was the only time he and Michael had discussed the issue. But when Senator Fitzgerald turned up dead a week ago, Michael could only wonder. That was quite a deal with the president's helicopter this afternoon. You wouldn't by chance know anything about who might do such a thing, would you? Nope. Coleman stared unflinchingly at Michael with his bright blue eyes. Do you remember that hunting trip we went on last year? Of course. Do you remember that bit of information I passed on to you? Yep. So what do you think about the assassinations? I'm not doing a lot of mourning, if that's what you're asking. No, I didn't think you would be. Any idea who might be behind them? No. You? I might. You haven't by chance talked to anyone at the FBI lately? O'Rourke shook his head. Good. Are you planning on talking to anyone at the FBI? No, I think you and I can handle this one-on-one. Hypothetically, if you knew who the assassins were, do you think you could give them a message from me? I suppose almost anything is possible. Tell them to give us some time to implement their reforms before this thing gets any uglier. That sounds like a good idea, but I'm not so sure the president and his people have gotten the hint. And now that our friend Senator Olson is trying to screw things up, I don't think these guys are done killing. At least not until the president and the others come around. So you think there will be more assassinations? I wouldn't know. Both men stared each other down for a while. Finally, Coleman looked at his watch. I'm running late. I should really get going. Let's get together for lunch next week.
Michael grabbed Coleman's arm. "Scott, I'm not going to pass judgment on you, but I think it's time to let the politicians finish what's been started. You politicians, present company excluded, have a history of screwing things up when the clear objective is within reach." Coleman turned toward his apartment. As he reached the first step, he turned to Michael. "There's one thing you can do. You still keep in touch with Senator Olson?" "Yes." "Might be a good idea to tell him now is not a good time to get into bed with the president." "Keep Eric out of this, Scott." "I'm sure Eric will be fine. I'm just saying, hypothetically, it would be a good idea to warn him." Coleman gave Michael a half salute and entered the building. McMahon walked down the executive hallway at a quicker than normal pace. The events surrounding the president's unusual flight to Camp David were coming together like a jigsaw puzzle, and a crucial piece of the puzzle had just been discovered. McMahon hadn't had the chance to check his voicemail until just minutes before. The message left by the assassins had sat untouched for over 5 hours. McMahon nodded to Director Roach's secretary and continued through the door, closing it behind him. Roach looked up at McMahon. "What's up?" "We got a message from our friends, and it's been sitting under my nose all day." "What do you mean, friends?" "The assassins." McMahon punched his voicemail number into the phone. When it was ready to go, he pushed the speaker button. The computerized voice played from the small speaker. When the message was over, Roach asked McMahon to play it again. "Who in the hell are these guys?" "They're not terrorists, Brian. Let's come to an agreement on that right now. And they're not some fringe white supremacist group. These guys are exactly who Kennedy said they were from day one. They're former commandos." "I think you're right. When are you going to tell the president?" "I'm flying out to Camp David in about 30 minutes to brief him." "You don't have to come if you don't want to. I know how much you hate these briefings." "Are you crazy? I wouldn't miss seeing the expression on Garrett's face when he hears these guys are on to him." It was just after 7 p.m. when the president and Garrett entered the room, taking their spots at the head of the table. Mike Nance was seated at the far end of the table so he could observe everyone. Stansfield, Roach, and McMahon were seated on the one side, with Warch and Director Tracy on the other. Garrett looked at Roach. "Director Roach, do you have any new developments to report since we talked earlier?" "Yes, as a matter of fact, we have received a message from the assassins." Each spot at the conference table had a phone in front of it. McMahon pulled the one in front of him closer and punched in his voicemail number. He hit the speaker button, and the message started to play. Everyone listened intently. When the tape ended with,
"Mr. President, the Secret Service cannot protect you from us. They can make our job more difficult, but they cannot stop us from ending your life. This is your last warning."
the president looked to Jack Warch and Director Tracy for reassurance, but only got straight faces and silence in return. "Could they have shot down Marine One today?" "Yes, Mr. President. I spoke with the pilots, and they said there's no doubt in their minds that Marine One could have been blown out of the sky this afternoon." "Can you protect me or not?" "Sir, our ability to protect you is directly related to your desire to be protected. And if you continue to make yourself accessible to the media and the public, we will not be able to protect you." "Jack, you do whatever you need to make things more secure." "Mr. President, our investigation has hit a wall. We believe these assassins are former United States commandos. Special Agent McMahon and his people have received very little cooperation from the Special Forces people at the Pentagon. They're stonewalling us at every turn." "Mike, what's the problem?" "Well, sir, there are certain national security issues involved here." "I don't want to hear about problems. I want to see some results." Stevens turned back to Roach. "I will have an executive order ready by tomorrow morning, giving Special Agent McMahon permission to review any personnel file he wishes. We are done dragging our feet on this. I want these people caught." While Nance tried to think of a way around this new problem, Warch briefed the participants on the evidence they'd found under the bridge. The meeting ended just after 8 p.m., and everyone left the conference room except Garrett and Nance. "Stu, you were awfully quiet during the briefing. Did that tape get to you?" "No, I'm not scared of these terrorists. I'm worried about something else."
Warch knows about the job we did on Frank Moore. He told me he knows who was involved, and if I don't back off and listen to him, he'll tell the FBI. Did he mention my name? Yes. Did he mention any other names? Yes, he mentioned Arthur's. I have no idea how he found out. Nance knew exactly how Warch had found out. He or one of his people must have overheard Stu talking to God knows who about their little blackmail operation. Arthur will not be happy about this. Clear your schedule for tomorrow evening. He wants to talk to us about something else, and it can't wait. The moon was showing only a sliver of white as it sat suspended above the tall pines. The four-door Crown Victoria approached the main gate of Camp David, and the two occupants in the back seat ducked down. The electric gate slid open, and the sedan, carrying the National Security Advisor and the President's Chief of Staff, accelerated past a mob of reporters. Saturday's budget summit at Camp David had been a mixed success. Garrett had come up with some accounting gimmicks that would make the budget deficit look smaller than it really was. Their hope was that it would pacify the assassins and give the FBI some time to catch the killers. Senator Olson had balked on the deal, telling the president he would have no part in misleading the American people. Nance and Garrett spent most of the 50-minute drive talking in hushed whispers. When they reached Arthur's estate, a man carrying an Uzi stepped out of the guardhouse and approached the sedan. Arthur was sitting behind the desk in his study, watching the scene at the front gate. Embedded in the wall to the left of his desk were 4 security monitors and 2 color TVs. Arthur watched the guard go back into the small booth, and a moment later the gate opened. Arthur pressed a button on the underside of his desk, and a map of the world slid down and covered the monitors. Rising from behind the desk, he walked to the fireplace. The door opened and Nance and Garrett entered. "Stu Garrett, I would like to introduce you to Arthur. It's great to finally meet you. I've been looking forward to this." "The pleasure is all mine. Please, sit." Nance eased his way over to Arthur's side. "Before we get started, I would like to go over a couple of things with you in private." Arthur led Garrett toward a pair of French doors. "The view of the Chesapeake is beautiful from the veranda. We'll be out to join you in a minute." Closing the door behind his guest, Arthur walked back to Nance. "What's the problem?" "It seems that our involvement in the blackmailing of Congressman Moore is known by someone outside the original group." "And who would that be?" "Jack Warch. He's the special agent in—" "I know who he is. How did he find out?" Nance told Arthur about the confrontation between Garrett and Warch. When he was done, Arthur asked, "And how do you think Mr. Warch found out?" "I think that Mr. Garrett wasn't as careful as he should have been." "I would concur." "What do you want to do about Warch?" "For now, nothing. He's not the type to go to the press. Besides, the Secret Service is not in the business of embarrassing the president. Have you told Garrett about my proposition?" "No. Are you still going to tell him?" "Yes." "I'm not sure that's a good idea. You've always told me not to trust amateurs." "I've always told you to trust no one. Mr. Garrett has his faults, but he's a highly driven man who'll do anything to succeed. The more he stands to lose, the more apt he'll be to stay quiet. If we up the ante, Mr. Garrett will stay quiet." The two men walked toward the French doors and out into the night. McMahon received word through the Joint Chiefs that he was to show up at the Pentagon on Monday morning at 7 a.m. sharp. McMahon decided to bring Kennedy. The Army lieutenant who was escorting them to the Pentagon's offices for the Joint Special Operations Command led them into a reception area. Several minutes later, a one-star general emerged. He was a poster-board U.S. Marine, from his square jaw to his perfectly pressed pants and spit-shined shoes. The general stuck out his hand. "Special Agent McMahon, General Haney. Nice to meet you." "Nice to meet you, General." "And this must be Dr. Kennedy." Kennedy shook Haney's hand. The general ushered them into a state-of-the-art conference room. Each spot at the table was equipped with a phone, a retractable keyboard, and a computer monitor. "This is where we'll be spending most of our time. Please make yourselves comfortable. I'll be back in a minute." When the general returned, he was carrying a stack of files. A moment later, a man in a suit and tie entered. The general introduced him only as Mr. Della Pena. McMahon stared at him, trying to decipher what a non-military person had to do with the Special Forces. "Mr. Della Pena, you didn't say which agency you were affiliated with." "I work for the National Security Agency." "So, Mr. Nance sent you to keep an eye on things." Delapina did not respond. "All right," said General Heaney. "Let's get started." Michael and Seamus O'Rourke walked into the plush restaurant and were led to a table in the far corner. Michael looked toward the entrance of the restaurant. Senator Olson and 4 bodyguards walked across the restaurant. Olson pushed his way by 2 of the guards. "Seamus, I didn't know you were in town." Olson shook his hand and then Michael's. The 4 Secret Service agents sat at the next table. As soon as the waiter left, Michael said, "They were saying on the morning news that you cut $100 billion from the budget. Is that true?" "You don't sound like you believe it." "I don't think you can get the 2 parties together and cut $100 billion in 2 days. You'd be amazed what people are capable of doing when they're backed into a corner." Seamus leaned forward. "Eric, what happened up there?" "I promised the president I wouldn't talk about it." "Eric," Michael said, "if you don't think you can trust us, this town has really gotten the best of you." Olson looked at Michael and then Seamus, thinking about the close friendship between their 2 families. "I'll tell you what happened, but you have to promise me you'll tell no one. This means no one." "You have my word." Olson recounted the weekend's events and included the president's and Garrett's plan to mislead the public. Olson explained in detail how they were going to spend more money and, through accounting gimmicks, say they were cutting the budget. When Olson was done, he sat back in his chair. Seamus was the first to speak. "Those bastards all deserve to die." "You don't really mean that, do you?" "You're damn right I do." "I can't believe I'm hearing this. Have you lost all faith in the democratic process? In the people's ability to effect change by voting?" "The system's become too complicated and corrupt. Every single candidate lies to get elected, and then sells his soul to the parasite special interest groups who gave him the money to run his campaign. No one's willing to face the real problems and do what's right. I acknowledge that things could be better, but violence is not the answer. Violence is never the answer." Olson sat back and rubbed his eyes. "This entire thing is wearing me down. I'm going to give the president a week to put together a new budget with some real cuts in it, and if he does, I'll sign on." "What will you do if he sends this current one to the House?" "I will expose it for what it is, a sham." Michael felt a wave of confidence rush over him. With Eric taking the lead on this, the president would be forced to make real cuts. The senator looked down at his watch. "Damn, my committee meeting starts in 5 minutes." Olson left. Seamus paid the tab and they walked out onto the sidewalk. Michael had told Seamus of his meeting with Scott Coleman. Seamus's only response was, "Stay out of the man's way. If he's behind it, we should all be grateful." Michael thought his grandfather was carrying it a little too far, but for the time being he agreed that it would be best to give Coleman room. They were waiting for the light to change when Michael turned and saw Senator Olson's limousine pull out of the underground parking garage a half-block down the street. The car turned toward them. Michael watched as it approached. Then the whine of a motorcycle caught his attention. The bike raced toward them. The bike approached the senator's limousine, and then, suddenly, the man riding on the back tossed a dark bag onto the roof of the limo. The bike continued on, slicing through the lanes of traffic. Michael looked at the bag and instinctively turned to shield Seamus. The noise was deafening. The roof of the limo imploded, and the tinted windows blasted outward. The explosion rocked the entire block, throwing the O'Rourkes and the other pedestrians violently to the ground. President Stevens was presiding over a cabinet meeting when Jack Warch entered the room. Warch bent over and whispered into Stevens's ear. The president stood so quickly he almost knocked his chair over. "My office, right now." Stevens, Garrett, Nance, and Warch filed out of the room, leaving the cabinet members wondering what was going on. No one talked as they followed Stevens down the stairs to the basement. An agent opened the door to the Situation Room. Stevens picked up a remote and pointed it at the 8 television sets. 5 of the 8 TVs were broadcasting images of Olson's charred limo. Liz had been in a meeting with her editor when the news of Olson's assassination broke. Knowing that Michael was eating lunch with the senator, she rushed to find out if he was all right. Michael's secretary informed her that he was unhurt and on his way home. Liz took a cab to Michael's house. When she arrived, she found Michael and Tim sitting at the dining room table, talking. Seamus was being held in the hospital overnight for observation. The explosion had knocked him to the ground and given him a minor concussion. After Liz's arrival,
Tim left so Michael and Liz could be alone. Liz reached up and touched the bandage on his forehead. "How does your head feel?" "Fine." Michael kissed her on the lips. Deep down he wanted to tell her everything, but he had to be careful. This would have to be handled in stages. "What would you say if I told you I think I know who the assassins are?" "You're not serious." Michael nodded yes. "You are serious. Who are they?" "I don't think I should tell you." "Why?" "Because knowing who they are might drag you into this, and right now there's no telling where it's going." "Are you going to talk to the FBI?" "No." "I can understand you not wanting to tell me, but I think you should tell the FBI. You owe it to Eric." "I'm going to meet with him first." "No, you're not. I will not allow it." "Don't worry, Liz. I'll be fine." "Don't give me that Marine Corps macho bullshit. Whoever this guy is, he's a cold-blooded murderer, and I don't want you meeting him alone. If you leave this house, I'm calling the FBI. Elizabeth, this man thinks of me as a brother. He would never do anything to harm me. He's normal. As normal as a SEAL can be, that is. As to the why, that's another can of worms, and when I say I can't tell you about it, I'm deathly serious. If I would have kept that secret to myself a year ago, none of this would have ever happened." Scott Coleman looked relaxed and lackadaisical as he strode down the sidewalk, but inside he was methodically taking note of everything around him. Crossing the intersection, Coleman turned left, continued for 3 blocks, and hailed a cab. The cab took him to a house in Chevy Chase. The house belonged to a 78-year-old widow who had rented him her garage for $25 a month. He walked along the side of the house to the garage. He got in the car. He drove slowly for the first few blocks and then zipped through the city, turning randomly down the narrow streets. The BMW's diplomatic plates and a Dutch passport he kept taped under the dashboard ensured him that he wouldn't be detained by the police. The racy driving helped release tension and served to frustrate anyone who might be trying to follow. After leaving D.C., he turned onto a narrow, unmarked dirt road. The road was lined with trees and thick underbrush. The car ascended a small hill, and as it crested, the lights of a cabin could be seen less than 100 yards away. The car stopped in front of the cabin. Coleman walked up to the porch. Without knocking, he opened the door and stepped inside. His bright blue eyes stared across the room at the man standing in front of the fireplace. Michael O'Rourke held his .45 caliber combat master. Coleman looked at the gun and remained calm. Coleman looked at the bandage on Michael's forehead. "What happened to your head?" "I was hit with something when Eric's limousine blew up." "You were there?" "Yes. Give me one good reason why I shouldn't call the FBI right now." Coleman started to walk across the room. Michael raised his gun. "Don't take another step. I know you'll never use that thing on me, so put it away and we'll talk. I wouldn't have used it on you before today, but now I wouldn't be so sure. I'll repeat myself one more time. Give me one good reason why I shouldn't turn you into the FBI." "I didn't kill Eric. I had nothing to do with it." "Bullshit. You killed 5 good men today and sent another 24 civilians to the hospital. I should put a bullet in your head right now and end this whole thing." Michael thought he heard a noise, and then without further warning, the door to the cabin flew open. Michael dropped to a knee and wheeled toward the door. Coleman did the same, retrieving his 9mm Glock from his jacket. Seamus O'Rourke stood in the doorway. He looked at the 2 guns. "Put those damn things away before you 2 hurt someone." Coleman did so on command, but Michael was a little more hesitant. "Michael, put your gun away." Michael lowered the gun, but did not put it away. "Seamus, you're supposed to be in the hospital." "I'm very aware of that, but knowing that this meeting would take place, I decided that my presence was more needed here than in bed." Seamus shuffled over and dropped into one of the chairs by the fireplace. "Michael, for the last time, put that damn gun away." "I'm not putting this thing away until he explains what in the hell he was doing today." "He wasn't doing anything today. Someone else killed Eric. Scott and his boys had nothing to do with it." "How would you know?" "I know, because I helped Scott plan the first 3 assassinations." "You what?" "I helped Scott plan the first 3 assassinations." "Why didn't you say something at the hospital?" "In front of all the nurses and the doctors? I told you not to do anything until we had a chance to talk. I knew with your damn temper you'd demand a showdown with Scott. I called your house to check on you, and Liz told me you'd left to meet someone.
When she got all nervous and flustered, I knew you'd told her. Why in the hell did you do that? I don't think you're in any position to criticize me. I'm not the one who's been running around staging a revolution. While the two O'Rourkes were locked in an icy stare, Coleman looked on. You two can sort this out later. Right now, we have a much bigger problem on our hands. Who has decided to join the fight? Michael, Seamus, and Scott Coleman were sitting at the kitchen table. Do we have any idea who was doing this or why? Eric's been in Washington for a long time. I'm sure he's made plenty of enemies over the years. The real question is, who would have the type of contacts to do something like this on such short notice? I agree. We have to assume that whoever's behind this has the power and the connections to put together an operation like this in under a week. That shortens the list considerably. Unfortunately, we don't have any contacts that run in those circles. I have someone I can trust who's very connected in the intelligence community, or at least was. Who? Augie Jackson. We were in the Marines together during World War II. After the war, he went to work for the CIA and went on to become one of the agency's top European analysts. He retired about a year ago. He's as honest a man as I've ever met. He lives in Georgia. I remember Augie. Do you think you can ask him what he thinks without drawing any attention to our involvement? I think so. All right, see what you can find out. Now, what do we do in the meantime? Something tells me we should lay low and see what happens. I think there's still a good chance that the reforms will be implemented. Absolutely not, Scott. You guys got this thing rolling, and you're going to stop it before anyone else gets killed. We don't have the contacts to go snooping around. The FBI does. So? I think we need to alert them that someone else is involved in this. If they start asking questions and poking around, maybe it'll scare these people away before they kill anyone else. The clock on the desk said it was 6:12 a.m., Wednesday. McMahon was sitting in his chair with his face resting on a stack of reports. Sometime around 5 a.m., he'd laid his head down for a quick nap. McMahon was immersed in a vivid dream when a noise startled him. It took a moment for him to realize he was in his office, and it was his phone, not his alarm clock, that was making the irritating noise. He lurched for the receiver. Hello? Michael was sitting in the back of the BMW as Coleman navigated the streets of Adams Morgan. Next to O'Rourke was a mobile scramble phone. Attached to the receiver was a voice modulator that converted Michael's voice into generic electronic tones. The phone was touted as being trace-proof.
Special Agent McMahon?
McMahon went rigid upon hearing the electronic voice. Before responding, he pressed a button next to the phone, starting a trace. Yes, this is he.
I will assume you are recording and tracing this call, so I'll be brief. The people that killed Senator Fitzgerald, Congressman Kozlowski, and Senator Downs did not kill Senator Olson and his bodyguards. There is a second group of killers.
Why should I believe you?
Mr. McMahon, we do not kill Secret Service agents and U.S. Marshals. As we stated in the last message, we have a deep respect for members of the law enforcement community. Our fight is with the politicians, not you.
That's where you're wrong.
Ask yourself one question. If we were willing to kill 4 Secret Service agents to get at Olson, why wouldn't we have blown the president out of the sky last Friday? The answer is that we didn't kill Olson. Someone else did.
Why are you telling me this?
Because we don't want to see innocent people die.
McMahon started to speak, but the line went dead. Roach's limo pulled up in front of the west executive entrance of the White House, and the director and McMahon rushed to the door. Jack Warch ushered them to the Situation Room. Mr. President, we've had a very unusual development concerning the investigation. Special Agent McMahon received another phone call from the terrorists. McMahon pulled a cassette tape out of his pocket and handed it to Jack Warch. Jack, would you please put this in the tape player for me? Passing sheets of paper to his right and left, McMahon said, These are transcripts of the conversation. I think it would be best if I let you hear the tape and then discuss it afterwards. Warch inserted the tape. The computer voice filled the room.
Special Agent McMahon.
Yes, this is he. CIA Director Stansfield had acquired a lot of habits from his days as a spy. One of them was the ability to study people's mannerisms. This occupational habit had become so ingrained in Stansfield that without consciously thinking about it, he leaned back in his chair and held the manuscript in front of him. His eyes peered over the top of the sheet and worked their way around the table, looking for someone to focus on.
I will assume you are recording and tracing this call, so I'll be brief. The people that killed Senator Fitzgerald, Congressman Kozlowski, and Senator Downs did not kill Senator Olson and his bodyguards.
A quick head turn caught Stansfield's eye. He looked at Garrett's eyes and followed them across the table to Mike Nance.
There is a second group of killers.
Stansfield saw sweat forming on Garrett's upper lip and followed his eyes again to Mike Nance. When Stansfield reached Nance, the National Security Advisor was staring back at him. When the tape ended, the President sat dumbfounded.
This is unbelievable. Special Agent McMahon, is this for real?
Without having had the time to really analyze it, I would have to say there's a good chance. I think we have no choice but to look into the possibility that there may be another group. Michael arrived at his office at 8 a.m. and left instructions with Susan that he didn't want to be disturbed unless it was Seamus or Liz. With less than 3 hours sleep since Monday, he collapsed on the sofa. He didn't know how long he'd been asleep when he heard Susan's voice calling for him over the intercom. He grabbed the phone.
Seamus, line 1.
There was a click, and then Michael heard his grandfather's voice.
Michael, what's your schedule look like for the rest of the day?
Well, we're not in session until Monday, so I'm pretty open.
Good. I thought it might be nice for you and me to get away for a while and spend some time relaxing up in the clouds. How about noon at your house?
The small Cessna flew along the southeast ridge of the Appalachian mountain range. They passed over a mountaintop, and a town farther up the valley came into sight. Brasstown, Georgia, was a small town about 1.5 hours north of Atlanta. The airstrip was cut right out of the tree line. Seamus lined up his approach and came in low above the trees. An old rusty hangar was the only structure in sight, and next to it was a Dodge pickup. Leaning against the hood was a man in boots, jeans, a flannel shirt, and John Deere hat. Seamus and Michael got out of the plane, and the man by the pickup approached.
Michael, you remember Augie, don't you?
It's been a while. Good to see you again, sir. Good to see you, Michael. Augie led them to the back of the truck, where he lowered the tailgate. He and Seamus sat. I've been doing a lot of thinking since I got your call last night, Seamus. In fact, I've been doing a lot of thinking since this whole thing started. Kind of a professional curiosity, I guess you'd call it. I think I might have some information that could help you. But before I go any further, I'd like to ask a few questions. Where did you hear that there's a second group responsible for the murder of Olson? I really can't say. You mean you won't? Why are you talking to me and not the FBI? The FBI has this information. I'd like to do a little searching on my own. Eric Olson was a good friend. That the only reason? Yes. You're a bad liar, Michael. Just like your grandfather. I suppose neither of you have any idea who's behind the first 4 assassinations. Michael shook his head. I didn't think you would. Well, I have a hunch who might have been involved, but before we get into that, I have some information that I think you'll find interesting. I'm going to tell you a story about something I took part in while I was at the agency. An irritating noise broke the silence of the pre-dawn morning. A hand reached through the darkness toward the red blinking digital numbers and found the alarm clock. A second later, the noise was silenced. O'Rourke rolled over and wrapped himself around Liz. He kissed her and got out of bed. Grabbing a pair of sweatpants, Michael put them on and headed downstairs. All of his hunting gear was kept in the basement. After descending another flight of stairs, Michael opened the closet and put on a pair of wool socks, khaki pants, a flannel shirt, and a pair of boots. The rest of his gear was kept out at the cabin, along with several shotguns. Less than 5 minutes later, he pulled up in front of his brother's house. Tim, Seamus, and Tim's lab, Cleo, climbed into the truck, and they headed toward the cabin. Against Michael's wishes, Seamus had told Tim everything that had happened over the past 2 weeks. For the majority of the drive, they discussed the information that they'd learned from Augie. When they arrived at the cabin, Coleman was already there. When everyone was settled in, Coleman asked, "What have you found out?" "Have you ever heard of a man named Arthur Higgins?" "Yes. He's an old spook over at the CIA. He handles a lot of dark operations and has a reputation as a man you don't screw around with." "Have you ever been involved in one of these operations?" "Nope. They use mercenaries, former commandos. Dark operations completely circumvent the chain of command. It's a strange world, very secretive and risky. All you ever hear about these people are whispers and rumors. I actually know some former SEALs who've worked for Higgins. Do you think you could talk to them and find out what they know about him? I could, but Higgins is the type of person you don't just start asking questions about, or you might end up as shark bait. What's got you so interested in him? Seamus and I took a little trip down to Georgia yesterday to talk to Augie Jackson. He's convinced that he's responsible for the killing of Eric. Michael slid a dossier across the table. Augie gave this to us. It's a full profile of Arthur's movements and security measures. Coleman opened the file and started thumbing through the pages. They were thinking about taking him out, weren't they? Yes. Coleman looked up at the former recon Marine sitting across the table. Michael, I think you and I should go take a look at his estate this evening. Coleman and the O'Rourkes stayed at the cabin until almost 10 a.m., talking about which course of action to take with Arthur. After the O'Rourkes left for D.C., Coleman spent most of the afternoon checking out the neighborhood where Arthur lived. After his sightseeing tour, Coleman drove to Sparrows Point, just south of Baltimore. The SEAL Demolition and Salvage Corporation was located in a dirty, dank building on the east end of the point. Coleman pulled his Ford Explorer into the large warehouse and got out. Earlier in the day, he had called his only 2 employees and told them to meet him at the office around 4 p.m. They were standing next to the office checking diving equipment when he arrived. Dan Strobel and Kevin Hackett were also former SEALs. They had served on Coleman's SEAL team for 3 years and had left the Navy about 6 months after their commander. Coleman slammed the door of his car and walked over to Strobel and Hackett. "How you guys doing?" "Great, sir. How about you?" "Fine. Have you checked the messages?" "Yep. There was nothing on the machine." When Coleman asked if they'd checked the messages, he actually meant, "Have you checked the office and phoned for bugs?" They knew that eventually the FBI would put them under surveillance. They needed an alibi that would explain all the time that they'd spent together while planning for their mission. So with some seed money from Seamus, they had started the SEAL Demolition and Salvage Corporation. "Let's get the gear together. I want to take the boat down to Annapolis and do a bid on a project. If the weather stays nice, we might be able to get some fishing in on the way back." Within 30 minutes, they were underway and headed for the bay. They centered their conversation on inconsequential small talk until Strobel finished going over the boat with the sensor. As they reached the bay, Strobel and Hackett huddled next to Coleman on the flybridge. With the engines roaring and not another ship within a mile, Coleman started to fill them in on the details of Seamus and Michael's meeting with Augie. They cruised south past Annapolis to Tolly Point, and Coleman headed for shore. Michael jumped on board holding a fishing pole and tackle box. "Welcome aboard, Congressman. Looks like we're going to have a nice night for fishing." Spinning the wheel around, Coleman headed back through the channel. Everyone was fitted with a waterproof radio and headset that was worn under their wetsuits. About a half a mile from Curtis Point, Coleman pulled to within a quarter mile of shore and turned south, counting the houses as he went. The entire shoreline consisted of an elevated cliff that ranged from 50 to 80 feet in height. Arthur's estate sat in the middle of a small swale. Coleman continued for another 400 feet and pulled to within 30 feet of shore, cutting the engines and dropping anchor. Coleman gathered everyone close together for a radio check and quick briefing. "All right, I'm Zeus, Michael is Apollo, Dan, you're Hermes, and Kevin, you're Cyclops. Arthur's estate is loaded with motion sensors, laser tripwires, and tremor plates. There's no way we're going to sneak in there without being noticed. What I want to do tonight is to get a better look at the neighbors' yards and get a general feel for the layout. Kevin, I want you and Dan to scout out the neighbors to the north. As far as I can tell, their security systems are for their houses only, not the grounds. Kevin, as soon as possible, I want you to find a spot in one of the big oak trees that run along the property line. I want you to be in a position to give us cover if we need to bug out." "What are my rules of engagement?" "We're here to gather information and get out." Strobel and Hackett stuck their snorkels in their mouths and slid into the water. Michael and Coleman slid into the water after them. When Michael and Coleman reached the dock of the neighbor to the south of Arthur, they swam ashore and took their backpacks and diving masks off. Coleman looked at Michael. You remember how to do this?
It's coming back to me.
Good. Let's go.
Michael followed as Coleman led the way up the stairs. They stayed low and scampered along a row of hedges that separated the lawn from the edge of the cliff. At the end of the hedges, they reached a small patio and gazebo. Just on the other side of the gazebo was a 10-foot brick fence that separated Arthur's yard from his neighbor's. Coleman grabbed one of the patio chairs and brought it around the back side of the gazebo. He and O'Rourke climbed onto the roof. They lay on their stomachs and looked over the fence. Almost all of Arthur's backyard was visible. Coleman spoke into his mic.
Cyclops, this is Zeus. Are you in position? Over.
That's affirmative, Zeus. I found a nice little nest with a bird's eye view. Over.
Have you seen any guards yet? Over.
That's affirmative. I count one man and a canine. They swept the backside of the house about 2 minutes ago. Over.
Hermes, this is Zeus. What's your position? Over.
Strobel was standing on the lowest branch of an old oak tree. He peered over the fence at the front of Arthur's house.
I got a good view of the front of the house. Over.
What do you see? Over.
I've got 2 guards by the front door. Both are accompanied by a German shepherd. Over.
All right, you guys know the routine. Announce any movements and mark the intervals. We should have one more guard at the front gate and one more in the house. Let's see how good these guys are. Over.
Less than a minute later, Hackett broke the silence.
I think I hear a car pulling up the driveway.
Nance stepped out of the back seat of his limo. His bodyguard and driver waited by the car, while the National Security Advisor was escorted into the house. When he entered the study, he found Arthur in his usual spot, waiting by the fireplace. O'Rourke and Coleman were concentrating on the guard who was standing watch at the edge of the cliff, when Hackett came crackling over their earpieces.
Zeus, this is Cyclops. I just spotted 2 men in suits that walked out of the house and are standing on the patio. Do you copy? Over.
O'Rourke and Coleman looked toward the house. O'Rourke tapped Coleman on the shoulder. What in the hell is Mike Nance doing here? Irene Kennedy was having a difficult time staying awake. She was sitting in the midst of stacks of green personnel dossiers. 94 to be exact. Kennedy was methodically picking through each file, reading every boring line of black print. She decided to read 2 more files and call it a night. Kennedy opened the next file and looked down at a picture of Scott Coleman. Beneath the photo was his date of discharge, a little over a year ago. Flipping to the last several pages, Kennedy read a list of covert missions that Coleman had participated in. She got to the last mission Coleman had participated in, and an empty feeling crept into her stomach. The code name for the mission was Operation Snatchback. Snatchback was something few people knew about, and something that no one wanted to talk about. The only thing listed after Operation Snatchback was Coleman's date of discharge. Next to the date, in parentheses, was the comment, "Early discharge granted." Kennedy flipped to the last page and found that Coleman was living in Adams Morgan and had started a company called Seal Demolition and Salvage Corporation. Kennedy wondered who the other employees of the Seal Demolition and Salvage Corporation might be. Grabbing the file, Kennedy walked briskly down the hall toward General Heaney's office. A young ensign was the only person left in the office area.
Is the general still in? Dr. Kennedy, he said goodbye almost 3 hours ago. Is there anything I can do to help you with, ma'am? Ensign, how unusual is it to get an early discharge when you're in the Special Forces? It's not that unusual. We have guys blowing out knees every other week. We get at least 1 broken back a year and a whole lot of other injuries. A lot of these knee injuries take a year to rehab, so if a guy is due to get out in a year and he blows his knee, we let him go early. If that was the case, wouldn't their file say medical discharge? Yes, that's correct.
Kennedy opened Coleman's file. She pointed at the last line.
This is different than a medical discharge, is it not? Yes, it is. I've never seen one of those before.
Kennedy asked the ensign for a piece of paper and wrote a note for the general. She paperclipped it to the top of the folder and handed it to the ensign.
Would you please put this on the general's desk for me?
Kennedy gathered her things and decided to let the rest of the files wait until morning. She had to be in Skip McMahon's office at 8 a.m. for a meeting. Arthur and Nance stood outside talking and smoking their cigars for about 40 minutes.
During that time, O'Rourke and Coleman speculated as to why the National Security Advisor would be talking to Arthur. Finally, Arthur and Nance went back inside. Several minutes after that, they heard a car drive away. Shortly after that, the guard standing watch by the cliff headed back for the house. Coleman lowered his mic.
All right, let's work our way back to the boat.
Coleman slid off the roof first, and O'Rourke followed. When they got back to the boat, Strobel and Hackett were waiting for them. As soon as Coleman and O'Rourke were on board, they turned north for Baltimore. All four of them were gathered on the flight deck. Hackett was telling them that he didn't think it would be difficult to take Arthur out.
I can't believe that a guy who's that paranoid about security is dumb enough to step out in the open like that just to smoke a cigar.
How hard do you think it would be to kidnap him? Michael asked.
A lot harder than shooting him in the head from 150 feet. You're not really considering that as an option, are you?
I'd like to get inside his head and find out what in the hell he and Mike Nance were talking about. O'Rourke knew Coleman was thinking the same thing.
Michael, the only way we can do that is to take the guards out. We can either take Arthur out without knowing what's going on, or we can grab him and find out what he and Nance are up to. I say we grab him, but the decision is yours.
Irene Kennedy appeared in Skip McMahon's office at 8 a.m.
I need to call General Heaney and ask him about something.
Would you dial his office and put it on the speaker?
I was reviewing those personnel files last night, and I came across something a little unusual.
One of the general's aides answered, and a moment later, Heaney was on the line.
Good morning, Skip. What can I do for you?
General, I've got you on the speakerphone. Irene is here with me, and she has a question for you.
Good morning, General. Did you get a chance to look at the file I left on your desk last night?
Yes, I read it over first thing this morning.
Did you know Commander Coleman?
Yes, I did. He was top-notch.
I noticed last night that out of all the files I reviewed, Coleman was the only SEAL who had been granted an early discharge. Do you know why?
Irene, are you familiar with Operation Snatchback?
Yes, I helped put the pre-mission intel together.
Well, Coleman was the commander of the SEAL team we sent in.
His discharge was granted about a month after the mission? Did he request the early discharge, or was it offered to him?
I'm not aware of the exact circumstances. Admiral DeVoe, the force commander for the SEALs, and the Secretary of the Navy signed off on it.
Do you think you could track the Admiral down and call us back? I'd like to ask him some questions about Coleman.
I'll get him on the line and call you right back.
What was that all about? McMahon asked her. Do you remember the Pan Am flight that was blown up over Lockerbie, Scotland?
Yeah.
About 15 months ago, the agency located the whereabouts of 2 terrorists responsible for the bombing. They were at a small military base in northern Libya. We sent a SEAL team in to take them out. I'm not sure what happened. All I know is that we lost part of the team.
The phone rang.
Skip, General Heaney. I've got Admiral DeVoe on the line.
McMahon hit the speaker button.
Good morning, Admiral. I have Irene Kennedy from the CIA in my office. We'd like to ask you a few questions.
Michael O'Rourke and Scott Coleman were running a couple of minutes late. They had met at the cabin earlier and finalized the plans for the mission. Because of the lack of preparation time, they had decided to keep things as simple as possible. If Arthur stepped out to smoke a cigar, they would grab him. If he didn't, they would have to try again the next night. The sun had set at about 5:40 p.m., and the rural Maryland roads were crowded with commuters going home after work. Coleman was driving and had his night vision goggles perched on his forehead. When they were less than a mile from the old estate, Coleman spoke into his mic.
Hermes, how does everything look? Over.
The coast is clear. Over.
Open the gate.
They passed the main gate of an abandoned estate. About 150 feet later, they reached the service drive, and Coleman turned hard. The black car slipped onto the overgrown drive and squeezed through the encroaching trees and bushes, disappearing from sight. Strobel closed the gate and went down the path to join the others. Coleman, O'Rourke, and Hackett were standing by the open trunk. Hackett handed them their MP5s, and when Strobel joined the group, Coleman brought everyone in.
Let's go over this thing once, and then let's get into position. Stop me if you have any questions. Okay, once from the top. When we get into position, we sit tight. We watch the guards. We wait. The surveillance reports that Michael got say he steps out for a cigar almost every night, sometimes for only a couple of minutes. The point being, if he shows, we move fast. The surveillance report says that Arthur is outfitted with a homing device and alarm. He has a lot of secrets in his head, and the CIA doesn't want someone getting a hold of them. I don't know if this homing device is sewn into his clothes or in his shoe or in his watch, so Michael and I have decided not to take any chances. We're going to strip him naked and put everything in a bag. Dan, when you reach the patio, you should have everything ready to go. Michael will give you the bag, and then I want you to get down to the boat as fast as possible and get the engines warmed up. Kevin, you stay in the tree and cover Michael and me until we're over the wall with Arthur. The second we're clear, get the hell out of the tree and come down to the boat. At 70 knots, it should take you approximately 15 minutes to reach Cove Point. Tim O'Rourke will be waiting to pick you up. Coleman went to the trunk of the car. He grabbed 4 bundles of rope and handed one to each man. Let's get moving. Be careful and stay cool. 6 floors beneath the main level of the Central Intelligence Agency was a room that never slept. The operations center of the CIA was the agency's version of NASA's Mission Control. But instead of monitoring space missions, these men and women monitored spy missions. Their function was to serve as the main communications link between the field and the rest of the agency. Information was what the agency was all about, and disseminating it in a quick, secretive, and orderly fashion was crucial. Charlie Dobbs sat behind the plexiglass wall of the watch commander's office. 5 computers were on Dobbs's desk, and at any time he could check on his operators and see what they were doing. Messages came in off the satellite system and were encoded with a number designating their importance. Routine traffic came in preceded by the number 1, and emergency traffic came in preceded by the number 5. The computer prioritized these messages and queued them according to their importance. Level 5 traffic was not uncommon during a crisis, but since the global scene had been pretty quiet, Dobbs was expecting a slow night. When they reached the yard to the south of Arthur's estate, Strobel and Hackett disappeared down the stairs. From there, they were to get in the water and swim past Arthur's to the neighbors just to the north, where the boat was docked. Coleman and Michael ran across the open lawn to the brick wall that separated Arthur's compound from the neighbor to the south. They found the large oak tree that they had scouted the night before and climbed it in silence. They pulled their night vision goggles down and surveyed Arthur's estate. Michael was just about to comment on how difficult it was going to be to hang out in this tree all night when the doors of Arthur's study opened and the owner of the estate strode out onto the veranda. Michael watched Arthur approach the far edge. Coleman could see the bright orange flame of Arthur's lighter licking away at the tip of the cigar. Hermes and Cyclops, our target is in sight. Move into position. Hackett and Strobel ran toward the tree where Hackett had sat the night before and stopped at the base. They affixed the silencers to the end of their weapons and put on their backpacks. Strobel boosted Hackett up, and he grabbed the first branch, pulling himself into the tree. Not wasting any time, Strobel turned and ran toward the front of the house. When he reached the tree where he'd been the night before, he pulled himself up. Coleman gave Michael the thumbs-up signal. On my mark, boys. 3, 2, 1, bingo! Hackett squeezed the trigger and sent a bullet smashing into the head of the guard by the cliff, and then pumped a quick round into the dog. Strobel fired 3 silent shots at the guard by the front door. The first one hit him in the temple, killing him instantly. Strobel swung from the tree and landed just on the other side of the fence. He snapped his gun up toward the roof and squeezed off a dozen shots. The bullets thudded into the metal casings that covered the cameras. He heard a growl to his right. The dog was closing fast. Strobel sent one bullet into the snout of the dog. Slamming a fresh magazine into his gun, Strobel ran for the other set of cameras, firing bullets into the windows as he went. Coleman hit the ground a second before Michael, and as he sprinted for the patio, he could hear the bullets from Michael's gun striking the cameras above and to his left. The noise of the bullets hitting the cameras must have caught Arthur's attention, because he looked in their direction. Arthur broke for the house, and Coleman laid down a wall of bullets that sent chips of brick flying into the air. Arthur stopped in his tracks. Coleman screamed for Arthur to put his hands in the air while he unleashed a volley of bullets at the second set of cameras. Just as he got to Arthur, the floodlights came on. Coleman kicked Arthur in the stomach, sending him to the ground, then wheeled, firing at the floodlights hanging from the gutter of the house. Within seconds, darkness was restored. Arthur was curled up, holding on to his stomach, gasping for air. Michael pulled a chloroform patch from his pocket and forced the old man to breathe in the fumes. After about 10 seconds, Michael went to work getting Arthur's clothes off. Strobel approached and helped Michael. He made sure everything was in the bag and then sprinted for the north wall. All that remained on Arthur were his boxers. Michael threw the skinny old man over his shoulder and ran for the south wall, with Coleman covering the way. Hackett rappelled down the tree and turned for the cliff. By the time he reached the dock, Strobel had the boat pointing toward the open water. Hackett leaped into the cockpit. The boat quickly gained speed and planed out. Strobel checked his watch. 1 minute and 43 seconds had elapsed since they'd gone over the wall. Charlie Dobbs glanced over his shoulder after the monitor beeped for the third time. The information came up on the screen. Flash traffic level 5. Type personal alarm. Subject code name Red Coyote. Dobbs punched in his password so he could access the identity of Red Coyote. A second later, the name Arthur Higgins appeared on the screen. Director Stansfield was sitting at his desk when the phone rang.
Thomas, it's Charlie. We've got a major problem. Someone just grabbed Arthur Higgins.
I'm on my way down. Stansfield hung up the phone and headed for the door. He battled to suppress the hope that Arthur had been killed. He had more damaging secrets in his head than any other person in the agency. If he was taken alive and interrogated, the agency would be compromised at every level. Stansfield approached the door to the operations center. Charlie Dobbs was standing with his watch officers conferring on the crisis. Stansfield approached. Give me the rundown. We're tracking his homing signal right now. Dobbs pointed at the big screen in the front of the room. A detailed map of the Chesapeake was on the screen and a slow-moving red dot. It appears they've got him on board a boat and are making a run for the open sea. We've scrambled 2 Cobra gunships out of Quantico, and an AWAC was on patrol when the whole thing went down. The AWAC has confirmed our bogey and has classified it as a small watercraft, moving at a speed of 62 knots. They looked at the big board and watched the moving red dot. Charlie, do whatever it takes to get him back. Strobel kept the boat just to the west of the channel markers. Hackett came out from the small cabin and announced that the charges were set. Strobel gave Hackett a thumbs up. Hackett dove off the back of the boat. As soon as Hackett was away, Strobel flipped on the running lights, grabbed his fins, and ran for the back of the boat. He hit the water, rolling as he went. Back in the operations center, Stansfield watched the chase unfold on the big board. The position of the 2 Cobra gunships was marked by green triangles, and the choppers were closing quickly. The small charges exploded, ripping 3 holes in the bow of the boat and 2 more next to the engines. All forward movement stopped, and the boat slipped beneath the surface of the dark water. Stansfield watched the green triangles inch closer and closer to the stationary red dot. The AWACS controller vectored the choppers right in on top of the mark, and then came the surprise. The pilots announced no boat was in sight. The black BMW weaved through the Friday night traffic of Georgetown. As Coleman drove, he told Michael that his former boss, Admiral DeVoe, had called to tell him the FBI was snooping around asking questions. Did he say why they're interested in you? Only that they want to know why I was discharged early. That means they know about Snatchback. Did the Admiral tell you who called him? No. All he said was that they were from the Bureau. Michael, I wouldn't get too worried yet. They might just be going down a list of former SEALs. I doubt it. The FBI is looking for someone who had motive enough to do this, and when they find out Fitzgerald was the one who leaked Snatchback, they're going to be all over you. Coleman stopped in front of Michael's house and O'Rourke jumped out. Flipping up the black cover on the security pad, he punched in the code for the garage door. Coleman backed the car into the garage, and Michael followed, closing the door behind him. Before opening the trunk, Michael and Coleman pulled their masks down over their faces. Coleman inserted the key into the lock. The trunk opened, revealing the bony white body of Arthur. Coleman brought him into the house. The ground level of O'Rourke's brownstone consisted of a single-car garage on one side and a utility and washroom on the other. They brought Arthur to the corner of the washroom and set him on the floor with his back against the wall. Coleman went out to the car and came back with a small black case. Inside were 2 liquid vials and several syringes. Coleman grabbed the vial labeled sodium pentothal and filled the syringe about halfway. Coleman grabbed a stick of smelling salts and stuck it under Arthur's nose. What are you doing? Where am I? Coleman found a vein, slid the needle in, and depressed the plunger. Arthur watched with a panicked look on his face. You have no idea what you're doing. My people will come looking for me. They'll find you no matter what it takes. As Arthur shouted, Michael came down the stairs with a tape recorder, video camera, and a set of small speakers. Michael and Coleman ignored him while they set up the equipment. O'Rourke plugged the 2 speakers into the mobile scramble phone and attached the voice modulator to the mouthpiece of the handset. Is there any chance he'll be able to lie to us? No, I've used this stuff in the field before, and you can't fight it. Coleman looked into the dilated eyes of the old man and then told Michael that Arthur was ready. Coleman turned on the camera, and Michael hit the record button. Director Stansfield stared at the big board on the front wall of the operations center and noted the running time since Arthur's personal alarm had been sounded. They were approaching the 40-minute mark, and Arthur was nowhere to be found. Stansfield picked up a secure line and dialed the number for the National Security Desk at the White House.
Major Maxwell speaking. Please identify yourself.
This is Director Stansfield of the CIA. Alert the National Security Council and bring them in. We have a potential crisis in the making. Tell the President I'll be there in 15 minutes.
Yes, sir.
Arthur answered the last question of his life. Michael looked at Coleman and pointed toward the door. When they got into the hallway, they took off their masks and stared at each other. This is unbelievable. It's more than unbelievable. It's enough to bring the whole government down. Do you want to ask any more questions? No. We found out what we wanted. The sooner we get rid of them, the better. I agree. You make a copy of the tape. I'll take care of Arthur. They went back into the room. Michael grabbed the tape and went upstairs. Coleman grabbed the empty syringe and pulled the plunger back, filling it with air. He stuck the needle into Arthur's arm, sending thousands of lethal air bubbles into his bloodstream. Coleman had no desire to watch him die, so he went to the garage to find something to wrap the body in. Michael came back downstairs and they placed the corpse in the trunk of the BMW. Coleman looked at O'Rourke. What are you going to do with the tapes? I'm not sure. Well, whatever you decide to do, you're going to have to do it without me. I don't think you and I'll be able to see each other for a while. If you're right about the FBI, I'm going to have to lay low. I've been thinking about that. This tape might come in handy. How? This little confession would topple the entire government if it was released. They'd do almost anything to keep it quiet. Yeah, like putting a bullet in the back of our heads. Not if we do it right. Let's talk about it in the car. You're coming with me to dump the body? Yeah, I know the perfect place. When Stevens arrived in the Situation Room, Director Stansfield and the Secretaries of State and Defense were standing off to the side talking to Garrett. The President approached Stansfield. Mr. President, the agency's former Director of Black Ops, Arthur Higgins, was abducted from his home in Maryland at 7:06 this evening. Garrett's face turned white. Stansfield noticed the change in the Chief of Staff's demeanor. Right now, we have no idea who's taken him or why, but we have to assume the worst. Higgins is in possession of a vast amount of highly sensitive information. If he's interrogated, our intelligence apparatus will be affected on a global scale. Garrett's reaction was so out of character that Stansfield paused. Mr. Garrett, I didn't know you knew Arthur. I didn't. I just heard his name mentioned before. Do we have any idea who would have taken him? The President queried. My people are putting together a list right now. The phone started to ring. Stansfield excused himself and grabbed it.
Thomas, we found him.
Where?
You're not going to believe this. He's at Stu Garrett's house. He's dead. I'm watching it on the damn news.
Coleman found a parking lot downtown and left the Beamer unlocked with the keys in the ignition. From there, he walked 2 miles to Adams Morgan. He was out of the game, and he knew it. The FBI would be waiting for him. It was only a question of where and how many agents. Coleman turned up the steps to his apartment building. He climbed to the second floor and stopped in front of his door. Bending over, he checked the lock for any signs of its being picked. There were none, but that didn't mean it hadn't been done. Michael was sitting in his den. He looked at the tape of Arthur's confession, and a plan started to form in his head. Going to the media would cause more harm than good, but Nance and Garrett had to pay. They were going down, whatever it took. Stu Garrett paced frantically behind his desk. Mike Nance had been watching Garrett for the last 10 minutes, waiting for the Valium to kick in, straining to control the urge to bash Garrett over the head. "I can't believe I let you talk me into this. I must have been out of my mind when I agreed to get into bed with Arthur." "Stu, do you think your emotional tirades are going to do us any good? We have a meeting with Stansfield in 10 minutes, and we are going to have to come up with some answers as to why Arthur's body ended up on your lawn. And if you don't get control of your emotions, Stansfield will tear you to shreds." "I'm sorry, Mike. I just can't believe all of this is happening so fast. What in the hell are we going to do? Stansfield knows I was lying to him when I told him that I'd never met Arthur. What am I going to tell him? Stu, just sit down and relax while I tell you what we're going to do." Michael sat above the morning traffic as he rolled through downtown D.C. in his Chevy Tahoe. When he was about 4 blocks from the Hoover Building, he dialed the phone number for the main switchboard.
Federal Bureau of Investigation. How may I help you?
"Special Agent McMahon, please."
Just one moment. Special Agent McMahon's office.
"Special Agent McMahon, please."
Special Agent McMahon is away from his desk right now. May I ask who's calling?
"This is Congressman O'Rourke, and I need to speak with him. It's extremely urgent."
Special Agent McMahon is very busy right now. It would help if I could tell him what it is you wanted.
"I don't want anything from him. I just want to give him something. Something that'll have an enormous impact on his investigation."
Just 1 minute, Congressman. I'll see if I can track him down.
Several minutes later, McMahon answered the phone.
Congressman O'Rourke, sorry to keep you waiting. What can I do for you?
"I have something I need to give you.
What is it?
I don't want to talk about it over the phone."
All right, let me see when I have an opening.
"This can't wait.
When do you want to meet?
I'm down on the street in my truck."
I'm in the middle of something right now. Can you give me an hour?
"Special Agent McMahon, do you want to know who killed Senator Olson?"
I'll be down in 5 minutes. Pick me up at the south entrance.
O'Rourke circled the block and pulled up to the curb. McMahon came out of the building with someone Michael didn't recognize. Michael rolled down the passenger window, and McMahon leaned in. "Who is she?" "This is Irene Kennedy. She works for the CIA and has been helping out with the investigation." "Get in." McMahon climbed in the front seat, and Kennedy got in back. Michael pulled back into traffic. "What do you do for the CIA, Dr. Kennedy?" "I'm an analyst. Terrorism's my specialty." "Are you familiar with a guy by the name of Arthur Higgins?" "Very. What do you know about him?" Michael grabbed a letter-sized manila envelope and handed it to McMahon. "I found this on my doorstep this morning along with the tape, and you're not going to believe what's on it." Michael put the tape into the cassette player. Stansfield and Roach entered the Situation Room and sat across the table from Nance and Garrett. Nance hadn't planned on Roach coming. "Director Roach, we weren't informed that you would be joining us this morning." Stansfield answered for him. "I asked him to come. Arthur was transported across state lines and killed. The investigation falls under the jurisdiction of the FBI." "What investigation?" "The investigation into his death." "Surely you aren't serious. We can't have what Arthur did for the CIA brought under public scrutiny." "That'll be up to Director Roach and the Justice Department." Stansfield looked at the president. "Sir Arthur Higgins was privy to a rather large amount of classified information. My foremost concern is to identify the correlation between his being taken from his estate and being left at Mr. Garrett's house. I have to know what Arthur's relationship was with Mr. Garrett so I can assess any possible damage to the agency. We can go about this in one of two ways. Mr. Garrett can either tell me and my people everything he knows under the protection of the National Secrecy Act, or he can tell his story under deposition to the FBI." Garrett turned to Nance for direction. "Director Roach, would you excuse us for a minute?" Roach left the room. As soon as he was gone, Stansfield zeroed in on Garrett. What was your relationship to Arthur? Again, Garrett glanced at Nance. Arthur, Nance said, was helping us with a little project that had nothing to do with the CIA or the intelligence community. He was simply doing some freelance work for us that was political and nothing else. Stansfield looked at Garrett. Do you want me to bring Director Roach back in? The speechless Garrett had beads of sweat forming on his forehead and upper lip. The president was becoming impatient. What in the hell is going on here, Stu? You look like you're about to have a nervous breakdown. I want some answers. Nance jumped in. We recruited Arthur to help aid in the passage of your budget through the House. How? Arthur gathered some information for us that we used to convince some of the more reluctant congressmen to vote for your budget. You did what? Stu, was this your idea? No, kind of. Stansfield watched the president grow irate and decided that he had been kept in the dark. Kennedy was too engrossed in Arthur's taped confession to do anything but listen. When it was over, it dawned on her that she needed to get a hold of Stansfield immediately. Back in the Situation Room, Stansfield waited for the president to stop yelling. There was a knock on the door, and a Secret Service agent entered. Director Stansfield, your office is on the line. They say it's an emergency. You can take the call right here. The agent pointed to a phone by the door.
Thomas, this is Irene Kennedy. Get back to Langley as quickly as you can. I have a taped confession from Arthur, and you're not going to believe what's on it.
Adjacent to Director Stansfield's office was a soundproof conference room. Kennedy, McMahon, and Michael sat at the conference table and waited for Director Roach and Director Stansfield to arrive. The door flew open and Stansfield and Roach entered. Thomas, this is Congressman Michael O'Rourke. The congressman awoke this morning to find a package on his front step. It was from the assassins. Inside was a taped confession of Arthur Higgins. Along with the tape is a list of conditions the assassins want met. McMahon inserted the tape.
What is your name?
Arthur Higgins.
Who do you work for?
I don't work for anyone. Why don't you take those masks off and we'll talk?
Who did you used to work for, Mr. Higgins?
The CIA.
What did you do for the CIA?
A lot of things. Why don't we talk about releasing me before you find out something that you don't want to know?
Why did you leave the CIA?
I was forced out.
Why were you forced out?
They were afraid of me.
Who was afraid of you?
Stansfield and Olson.
Mr. Higgins, you were the author of a covert operation in the early 60s that resulted in the assassinations of several French politicians?
Yes.
Who were you working for at the time?
The CIA.
How many French politicians did you kill?
2. Claude Lapointe and Jean Bastreau. Stansfield wondered how the interrogators had managed to find out about one of the most classified operations in the history of the agency.
Why were they killed?
Because they were the leaders of a movement within the French Parliament that wanted all U.S. nuclear weapons removed from French soil.
Did anyone in the French government know that the CIA had killed 2 of their elected officials?
No.
How did you kill them without getting caught?
We made it look like French revolutionaries did it.
Since you left the CIA, have you conducted any operations similar to the one that you ran in France?
Yes.
Did you use the recent string of assassinations as a cover to kill Senator Olson?
Yes.
Why did you kill Senator Olson?
I hated him. He was a weak man who had no business interfering in the operations of the agency.
Who else was involved in your plot to kill Senator Olson?
Mike Nance and Stu Garrett.
Why did they want Olson killed?
Olson was going to announce that the new coalition was a sham, that their proposed budget cuts were fake. Besides, we knew if we killed some federal agents, it would undermine the public's support for the terrorists.
What were you getting out of the deal?
Garrett said he would get the president to force Stansfield out and replace him with me. Olson hated me.
With Olson gone, no one would block my nomination.
Did the president know about your plans?
I don't know. After several moments of static, the tape ended. McMahon held up a white piece of paper. This is addressed to the two of you. McMahon started to read aloud. If we released this tape, the damage to America would be devastating. The office of the presidency would be ruined, the American people's faith in the system would be destroyed, and the CIA would be shut down within 24 hours. We do not want to see America torn apart, but the actions of Mike Nance and Stu Garrett cannot go unpunished. In exchange for not releasing Mr. Higgins' confession, we demand the following. Mike Nance will announce his resignation by noon tomorrow and retreat permanently from public life. 30 days from now, Stu Garrett will also announce his resignation and cease any involvement in the American political process at any level. None of this is negotiable. If at any point Nance and Garrett attempt to renege on this arrangement, we will hunt them down and kill them. We are unsure as to what involvement President Stevens had in this plot, and for now are willing to allow him to stay in office if he meets the following conditions. He will put together a balanced budget for the next fiscal year, and he will meet our previous demands regarding a national crime bill and a national sales tax to retire the national debt. If these demands are met, we will allow Stevens to run for re-election. If the president wavers at any point, we will release the tape to the media. The second part of our demands involves the FBI. Director Roach, we do not expect you to condone what we have done, but if you agree not to prosecute Mr. Nance and Mr. Garrett, you must also agree to never bring forth any indictments regarding the assassinations of Senator Fitzgerald, Congressman Kozlowski, Senator Downs, and Speaker Bassett. We understand the compromising situation this puts you in, but considering the piece of information in our possession, we think it a reasonable trade-off. We will await the announcement of Mike Nance's resignation. If it is not made public by noon tomorrow, we will be left with no other option than to release the tape. McMahon set the letter down. Director Stansfield rose. Please excuse Director Roach and me for a moment. Stansfield walked to the door, and Roach followed. Stansfield closed the heavy soundproof door to his office. Well, that's one hell of a confession. Do you believe it? Unfortunately, yes. What do we do then? We have to take the deal, and we have to work fast. Can we trust these assassins? Apparently, we can trust them a hell of a lot more than the National Security Advisor and the President's Chief of Staff. President Stevens was standing at the far end of the table. Nance and Garrett were seated. Stansfield and Michael stopped behind the last two chairs. Mr. President, this is Congressman O'Rourke. Out of habit, Stevens extended his hand, and then a strange look appeared on his face as he remembered his phone conversation with a young congressman some 2 weeks earlier. Michael shook the president's hand, and the three of them sat. Stansfield pulled the tape from his pocket and held it for everyone to see. Mr. President, someone left this tape on Congressman O'Rourke's doorstep this morning. Before I play it, Mr. Garrett, would you like to tell us the real reason Arthur Higgins was dumped at your house last night? I have no idea. Stansfield inserted the tape in the cassette player. Michael's electronically altered voice came over the speakers.
What is your name?
Arthur Higgins. Garrett shot forward in his chair. Nance grabbed him by the arm and pulled him back. Stay calm. The tape continued with the computer voice asking Arthur about his past and what he had done for the CIA. Director Stansfield was locked in a stare with Nance as the tape played on.
Did you use the recent string of assassinations as a cover to kill Senator Olson?
Yes. It wasn't my idea. I swear it wasn't my idea. Shut your mouth. The president stared at his close advisors in disbelief.
Who else was involved in your plot to kill Senator Olson?
Mike Nance and Stu Garrett. Garrett tried to say something, but Nance pulled him back into his chair before he could. Stevens lowered his head while Nance stared unflinchingly back at Stansfield.
Did the president know about your plans?
The president looked to Stansfield. I had nothing to do with this. Arthur's final words rang out. I don't know. The tape ended.
A slight smile creased Nance's lips. Nice try, Thomas. All of that is a lie, so I have to assume you either tortured Arthur into making those bizarre accusations, or you electronically altered the tape. Congressman O'Rourke received this tape earlier today, along with a letter from the assassins that were responsible for killing Senator Fitzgerald, Senator Downs, and Congressman Kozlowski.
What in hell is going on here?
I'm not sure, sir, but I think Director Stansfield is trying to blackmail us with this tape. I can assure you, and so can Stu, that we never discussed assassinating Senator Olson. The entire idea is preposterous.
Stu?
That's right, Jim. I don't know what in the hell any of this is about. The only dealings I had with Arthur were about your budget. Michael slid forward. Mr. Nance, you can either cut the shit and admit that you got Senator Olson, or I'm going to walk out this door right now and hold a press conference. Congressman O'Rourke, that would be a direct threat to the national security of the United States of America, and I would be forced to stop you by whatever means necessary. Now, if you would please step outside, we would like to speak to Director Stansfield alone.
You're going to keep your mouth shut while I talk to Mr. Garrett, and I swear if you utter a single word, I'm going to come over there and knock your head off.
Michael turned to Garrett. All right, now you've got one chance. You can either admit to what you did and live the rest of your life in relative comfort, or you can stand trial and spend the rest of your life rotting in jail. Of course, that's assuming the assassins don't get to you first. You see, the assassins also wrote in a letter that if you and Nance tried to squirm your way out of this, they would hunt you down and kill you. What's it going to be? The choice is simple. Stu, don't answer him. Nance reached for the phone to call for the Secret Service. Nance had just got the phone to his ear when he looked up to see the looming O'Rourke. Michael's fist came crashing down like a piston, smacking Nance square in the nose and sending the National Security Advisor back in his chair. Michael turned to Garrett with his fist still cocked. He grabbed Garrett by the tie and slammed him against the wall. If I had my way, I'd kill you right now. You've got one more chance to come clean and admit to what you did. If you don't, I'm going to grab you by the hair and slam your face off that table until your head splits in half.
It wasn't my fault. It was Mike and Arthur's idea.
The president looked at Garrett in utter shock.
It wasn't my fault, Jim. I swear it wasn't my fault.
The northwest wing of Mike Nance's rural Maryland horse ranch was decorated in a turn-of-the-century Western decor. The large room was 40 feet long and half as wide. On the right was an ornate wood bar that looked as if it had been plucked out of an old Western saloon. Mike Nance stood in front of the bar with a glass of scotch in his hand. Nance stared at his reflection in the mirror behind the bar. The white bandage over his nose made his two black eyes look worse. The soon-to-be former National Security Advisor judged that in another hour it would be dark. He took a drink of scotch and again asked himself if there was a way out. He was not ready to give up. His resignation did not have to be announced until noon tomorrow, and until then, he wasn't done. Nance heard the clamor of footsteps coming down the hall, and a moment later the door sprang open. Stu Garrett entered.
I'm sorry, Mike. I didn't want to talk, but I didn't see any other way out.
An hour earlier, Nance had called the loose-lipped chief of staff and summoned him to his ranch. As soon as Garrett came within striking distance, Nance slapped him in the face.
Ow! What in the hell did you do that for?
That is for not keeping your mouth shut. I knew I should never have listened to Arthur. I told him you didn't have the stomach for this.
Hey, I was fine until that madman O'Rourke started flexing his muscles.
I think it might be worth our while to have a little chat with the young congressman. I think he knows more than he was letting on. Besides, I'd like the opportunity to give him a little payback.
Mike, are you crazy? We've been given a chance to walk away from this whole mess. Let's take the deal and cut our losses.
I am more than willing to gamble on the fact that O'Rourke might know more than he claims. We have nothing else to lose, thanks to you and your lack of composure. Nance walked to his private study. He opened the right drawer of his desk, revealing a secure phone. He picked up the handset and punched in a number. Hello? Jared, this is Mike. I need you to do a little job for me. Michael O'Rourke was sound asleep until he felt a hand on his head. His eyes popped open. Scarlatti smiled and kissed his ear. I've been calling you all afternoon. Where have you been? What time is it? 10 after 6? Wow, that was the nap of the century. Did you find out who is behind Eric's death? Yep. Who? I'm not sure you want to know. Yes, I do. I honestly think you'd be better off not knowing any of it. Well, I can't live the rest of my life with this big secret hanging between us. If you don't trust my word, then maybe I should consider walking out of your life. All right. Here's what happened. And it goes without saying that you can never repeat any of this. Michael started to recount the events of the last 24 hours. He omitted Seamus's involvement with Coleman and failed to mention how they had found out about Arthur. I can't believe the FBI is going along with this. They have no other choice. Scarlatti had a far-off look in her eye. Don't even think about it, Liz. This story can never go public. I gave you my word, and I'm not going to go back on it. I may not like this whole mess, but I'm just happy it's over, and you're safe. How about I make us a nice quiet dinner for two, and then we can spend the rest of the night right here in bed? Liz grabbed him by the arm and led him toward the bathroom. You take a shower, and I'll go to the store and get us some stuff for dinner. Scarlatti headed downstairs and grabbed Duke's leash. The yellow lab appeared at Liz's side, and a moment later they were out the door and on their way to the Georgetown Safeway. The maroon Audi drove casually down the streets of Georgetown. The 54-year-old man behind the wheel was a former U.S. intelligence operative turned freelance operative, or utility man as he was referred to by his fellow spooks. He had received a call from a man for whom he'd done a lot of lucrative work over the years. If his old acquaintance was telling the truth, and there was no security, the job would be simple. The unimpressive, gray-bearded man drove past the house twice and parked. For several minutes he pointed a directional microphone at each room of the house. When he was relatively certain that only one person was home, he put away the equipment and got out of the car. Michael felt 10 times better after his long, hot shower. After pulling on jeans and a well-worn gray sweatshirt, he heard the doorbell ring. As he bounced down the stairs, he wondered briefly who it could be, and then realized Liz had probably forgotten her keys. Michael hit the landing with a thud and grabbed for the doorknob. You forgot your keys again, huh? When the door opened fully, O'Rourke froze. He didn't recognize the gray-bearded man wearing a trench coat and a fedora. Congressman O'Rourke? Yes? With a smile on his face, the visitor retrieved his right hand from his pocket as if to shake Michael's hand. In a smooth, nonchalant motion, he extended a taser's stun gun and squeezed the trigger. O'Rourke went rigid as 200,000 volts of electricity shot through his body. He took 2 steps backward and collapsed. As he fell to the ground, he landed on a thin wooden table in the entryway, shattering the fragile piece of wood beneath him. The not-so-harmless visitor carried O'Rourke to the rear of his car, where he lifted the trunk and deposited O'Rourke like a sack of potatoes. Scarlatti walked down the tree-lined street with a bag of groceries in one hand and Duke's leash in the other. Liz fished for her keys, and after finding the right one, opened the door. She went to set the groceries down, but froze. The table she wanted to set them on was lying on the floor in pieces. Liz called out Michael's name. She listened for a reply, then yelled his name louder. She set the groceries on the floor and headed for the stairs, calling Michael's name. Once upstairs, she inspected the bathroom and then checked the den before heading back downstairs, all the time calling Michael's name. She threw open the door to the garage. His truck was still there. She sprinted back up the stairs to the kitchen and checked to see if his keys were on the hook. They were. Scarlatti tried to think of where he could be, but her mind kept coming back to the broken table in the hallway. She willed herself to calm down and not overreact. I'll call Tim. Maybe Tim and Seamus stopped by, and they went to pick me up at the store. Scarlatti punched in Tim's phone number. After several rings, Michael's brother answered. Tim, this is Liz. Do you know where Michael is?
I think he's at his house.
No, he isn't. I'm here right now, and he's nowhere in the house. And that little table by the front door is smashed, like someone fell on it. Something isn't right, Tim.
Calm down, Liz. Is his truck gone?
No, his truck is here. His keys are here. I was only gone for a half hour. He knew I was coming right back. Something bad has happened. I'm calling the police.
No. Seamus and I will be over. Try to stay calm, and don't call the police until we get there.
Liz hung up the phone. She asked herself who would take him and why. Could it be Coleman? No. What about Stansfield? Michael had said it himself. If the story were to get out, the CIA would be shut down. Liz looked at the phone and hesitated for only a second. She called information, got the number for the CIA, and hit the connect button. A man answered. "Director Stansfield, please."
The director isn't in right now. May I take a message?
"Yes. I assume you have a way to get hold of him in an emergency."
Yes, if the message warrants it.
"Believe me, it does. Tell him Liz Scarlatti from the Washington Reader wants to talk about the events surrounding Arthur Higgins, Mike Nance, Stu Garrett, and Congressman Michael O'Rourke. Give him that message immediately and have him call me back at the following number in the next 5 minutes, or I'm going to press with what I have." Liz gave the man Michael's number and hung up. The startling ring of the phone caused Liz to jump. She snatched the phone off the kitchen wall. "Hello?"
Miss Scarlatti?
"Yes, this is she."
This is Director Stansfield. I just received your message, and I'm a little confused.
"I know everything. I know all about how Higgins and Nance and Garrett were behind the..."
We don't need to get into specifics, Miss Scarlatti.
Liz heard a click at the front door. She looked down the hall, hoping to see Michael, but instead Tim and Seamus came through the door and entered the kitchen. "Congressman Michael O'Rourke is missing from his house, and if he isn't returned within the next hour, I'm going to wire every news service on the planet the real story about what's been going on in Washington over the last week." Liz turned her back on Seamus and Tim. Stansfield was almost shouting.
Hold on a minute. How do you know Congressman O'Rourke is missing?
"I'm standing in his kitchen with his brother and his grandfather. He's gone, and if you don't return him within the hour, your little secret is going to be on the front page of every paper tomorrow morning."
I have no idea where Congressman O'Rourke is.
"Well, you'd better find him. You have 1 hour." Liz slammed the phone back into its cradle. Stansfield stared at the receiver and shook his head. Kennedy spoke briefly into the phone. When she was done, she looked at her boss. "A call was made from O'Rourke's house. It has to be Nance and Garrett. What in the hell are those two idiots up to?" Stansfield dialed Charlie Dobbs's extension in the operations center. Dobbs answered on the first ring. "What type of bird do we have over the city right now?" Dobbs hit several buttons, and a map appeared on the screen that marked the location of every satellite in the CIA, the National Reconnaissance Office, and the National Security Agency arsenal.
We currently have KH-11 on station.
The KH-11 Strategic Response Reconnaissance Satellite could tell the difference between a football and a basketball from a distance of 220 miles above the Earth. "Zoom it in on Mike Nance's ranch in Maryland, and I want 2 tactical teams ready to roll ASAP. Get the choppers warmed up. We might have to move fast."
What's going on, Thomas?
"More fallout from Arthur. Call me as soon as you get the imaging of Nance's ranch." Stansfield put the phone down. Nance had been given more than enough chances. If he wanted to continue to play it rough and risky, it was time to end the game before he could do any more damage. When Liz got off the phone, Seamus forced her to calm down and tell them what had happened. Given the evidence, they had to agree with Liz that things did not look good. "I don't think it's the CIA or the FBI. They were with him this afternoon. They could have done it then if they'd wanted to. Plus, you have to factor in the threat of the tape being released. It has to be Nance and Garrett. I'm going to let Coleman know what's going on. Tim, you stay here with Liz. I'll call you as soon as I find something out." Seamus jumped behind the wheel of Tim's Cherokee. When he was several blocks away, he turned on the mobile scramble phone. Scott Coleman was sitting on his couch when his pager started to vibrate. He glanced down at the small screen and recognized the number for Seamus's secure phone. After the 7-digit number came 3 more numbers. They told him that something was very wrong and that they needed to talk immediately. Coleman started for the door of the apartment building. Coleman was driving his Ford Explorer. He retrieved a small handheld bug sweeper from his pocket and swept as much of the car as he could from the front seat. Coleman put the sensor back in his pocket and readied his scramble phone. Next, he turned up the radio and faded the speakers to the back of the truck. If any bugs had been placed in the back seat or rear cargo area, the loud music would render them useless. Coleman dialed the number. After several rings, Seamus answered.
Hello?
"What's up?"
Michael has been taken.
What do you mean, taken? By whom?
We don't know, but we think it may have been Nance.
Michael used the tape to blackmail Nance?
Yes.
Coleman listened while Seamus relayed an abbreviated version of what had happened. Coleman asked for the number Seamus had been using to contact Stansfield, then told him he'd call him back in 10 minutes. If they didn't get Michael back quickly, they were in a lot of trouble. If I get the chance, I'm going to end this thing my way. The maroon Audi stopped at the security gate. The guard had been notified by his employer that this certain guest was to be allowed entry without inspection. The guard nodded for the driver of the car to proceed. Jared pulled the car up to the main entrance and popped the trunk. He walked to the rear, lifted the trunk, and studied O'Rourke. The congressman looked at the man who had abducted him. The man helped Michael out of the trunk. When they reached the house, the door opened, revealing a grinning Mike Nance. "Good evening, gentlemen." Nance nodded for the two men to follow and started down the hallway. The three men entered the game room. O'Rourke saw Stu Garrett standing behind the bar with a drink in his hand. Nance pointed toward Michael's mouth. "Jared, you can take off the tape." The man yanked the duct tape off O'Rourke's mouth. "Congressman, we have some unfinished business from this morning." "I finished my business with you when I broke your nose." "Yes, I suppose I owe you for that, don't I?" "Jared, would you please break Congressman O'Rourke's nose for me?" Michael had no time to react. Jared's hand came crashing down in a karate chop across the bridge of Michael's nose. There was a loud pop as O'Rourke's nose moved a quarter of an inch to the left. Michael gritted his teeth in an attempt to try to fight back the pain as blood streamed out of his nostrils. "I don't like resorting to violence, Mr. O'Rourke, but I do believe in an eye for an eye. Your behavior this morning was very uncivilized." "And I suppose killing Eric Olson was civilized. Spare me your bullshit." Nance nodded to Jared, and before Michael could react, a fist slammed into his lower back, sending him crashing to the floor. O'Rourke pushed himself up onto his knees. Michael reasoned the longer he kept them from asking some real questions, the better his chances were. O'Rourke felt his mouth filling with blood, and as he got to his feet, he spit it at Nance. O'Rourke had less than a second to enjoy his small victory. He was instantly knocked to his knees by another punch. O'Rourke looked up and saw Jared approaching with his stun gun extended. Michael saw something pop from the end, and then every inch of his body spasmed as electricity shot through his veins. The operations center in the basement was humming like the bridge of an aircraft carrier headed into battle. Charlie Dobbs pressed the speed dial for Stansfield's office. The director answered.
"The choppers are warmed up and the tactical teams are ready to roll. We also have the real-time thermal imaging online."
"What do you see?"
"The only thing to report is the arrival of a car. One person got out. They retrieved something from the trunk and went into the house."
"What'd they get from the trunk?"
"I don't know. We can't tell with the nighttime thermal imaging on the KH-11.
"Let me know if anybody else arrives or leaves the ranch. I'm going with the tactical teams. Give the pilots the location of Nance's place and tell the men to load up. I'm on my way down." Director Stansfield and his bodyguard walked out the rear exit of the main building at Langley and toward the waiting helicopters. The director climbed into the front seat next to the pilot, and his bodyguard got in back with the troops. Stansfield nodded to the pilot, and the helicopter lifted off the ground and headed east. The chopper moved forward at about 30 miles an hour. The wind coming out of the east would help carry their noise away from the house. The pilot brought the chopper up so the nose of the helicopter had a straight shot at the full length of Nance's house. The co-pilot manipulated the camera in the nose pod of the helicopter. A small 10-inch screen relayed a thermal image of the house. Halfway down the house, the co-pilot called out the first body. A bright red orb appeared near the front door. When he made it to the northern wing, he called out 4 more bodies. Stansfield looked through a pair of night vision binoculars. He concentrated on the large wing to the north. Lights were on, but the shades were drawn. "Delta 6, did you say you marked 4 signatures in the room at the far north end of the house?"
"That's affirmative, sir."
"All right, Delta 6, commence the operation." All 8 members of the tactical team were leaning out of the doors of the chopper. Their weapons were slung in the ready position. Just before reaching the house, the tail of the helicopter dipped, and the rotor blades braked the machine to a mid-air stop. The team leader yelled, "Go, go, go!" In unison, all 8 men kicked away from their airborne platform and dropped 40 feet. The 2 entry men were on the door 2 seconds after hitting the ground. The shock-lock rounds thudded into the wood, splintering the locks from the frame. The point man stepped forward with a grenade in one hand and his MP5 in the other. He kicked in the door from the center and rolled the grenade into the house. When the commotion started, Jared had just enough time to react. He stepped backward and dropped to one knee. As he was drawing his gun, he saw the flash grenade roll across the floor. He kept his gun trained on the door. As soon as the grenade exploded, he began squeezing off rounds. The lead man saw the flash of the pistol and let go a 5-round burst at Jared's head. All 5 shots were on the mark and sent Jared's body to the floor with a thud. The smoking MP5 found Nance and Garrett. "Down on the floor, right now!" The tip of the barrel closed to within 10 feet of the 2 men. The team leader informed Stansfield that the room was secure. Stansfield got out of the chopper and stepped over the broken glass and splintered wood. He took several steps forward and looked at the dead man on the floor. The marks left by the bullet holes made recognition impossible. Next, his eyes fell on the young congressman's bound wrists. "Cut him free." The team leader approached Stansfield. "Please take your men outside and leave us alone for a moment." The commandos exited the room. Garrett approached. "Thomas, I told him this was a crazy idea. I pleaded with him, but he ignored me." Stansfield looked at O'Rourke. "Are you all right, Congressman?" "I'll survive."